What is going on, gunfighters? Today is a little bit different. Today, a special treat. I've been off-grid, living where there's no service for a little bit. And I used quite that chunk of time for you guys. There was quite a few older episodes on survival guns. Survival guns for the newbie, survival guns in different categories. Anything from the 22 to the battle rifle. And the audio on those, to be honest, was horrible. Because back when I started this, if you guys don't know, I literally would just talk into the iPhone and upload it. No real editing, no nothing. I might pause it if I had a thought. But that was about it. And the background noise, me getting in and out of car, things like that. So you may think that putting out older content is easier, but it certainly for me is not easier. Actually editing and trying to make older podcasts sound good is far harder for me than just recording a new podcast. But I thought they were worth getting redone and remastered and put out. Also, since you guys wouldn't think that I was just putting out old rerun content, I recorded a brand new episode and a different take on survival guns that I don't know that I've really ever heard anybody talk about. At least not in the way that I'm going to talk about it today on survival guns, and that'll be the last installment. My plan is, if I can upload this big a file, is to compile them all into one big, giant survival guide gun episode. I hope you guys appreciate the amount of work that went into this. I hope that you guys will consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com. Again, goodshepherdtraining.com, supporting on Patreon. If you think the content you hear today in this episode is worth a fraction of the cost of one box of ammo, please consider going to Patreon and putting half that amount and becoming a patron. There's some cool insider content for Patreon. One of the coolest things is an insider chat for the patrons, and we talk about all kinds of cool stuff on there. Pretty cool discussion recently on the Mossberg Shockwave. Is it a gimmick? Is it a legit tool that has a place in your arsenal? Things like that. And that happens all the time. A lot of guys on there have a lot more expertise in areas than I do. It's a great chat that I'm humbled to be a part of. And if you want to be part of that, come to Patreon. Also some other content that I put out just for the patrons. So again, while you're listening, this is a long episode, please consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and at least checking it out. With that, let's talk about a really cool topic. Survival guns. Hello. Welcome back to Gunfighter Life. As always, I am your host, Michael Melito. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I make no apologies for that. God is first and foremost in my life, and Jesus Christ, His Son. That's first and foremost in everything I do, and this podcast is no different. I make no apologies for that. A little bit about me in this podcast. The main reason it was started was because a lot of people have a lot of opinions and stuff on guns and firearms and gunfighting. A lot of them have no practical experience, and I give God all the glory for my experience, but quite a bit of it. I grew up shooting and hunting at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories that I can actually remember are me hunting with a gun, with a bow and arrow. I'm taking deer and bear and things on the East Coast. And I grew up hunting and shooting as young. My earliest memories, like I said, are walking around with a gun. I started my first formal shooting competitions when I was still in school. In 1998, I started my first formal shooting competition. I've done all manner of shooting competitions, from precision Olympic rifle, small bore rifle, Olympic, back then it was 4 position, now it's 3 position. I've won more shooting competitions than I can remember. Pistol, Steel Challenge, USPSA, IDPA. I've won state and regional level championships. Let's see. I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I did 2 combat tours in Iraq in the infantry as an assaultman, a specialized infantry task, I guess you would call it, if you're not familiar with the vernacular, but an assaultman. Did that, 2 tours in Iraq. When I got done with that, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps. I taught urban warfare and desert warfare, mostly small arms, rifle and pistol, but also taught like vehicle tactics and demolitions, things like that, manner of urban warfare and desert warfare, to our military and foreign militaries. After that, I went to work for LAPD. I worked some of the nastiest streets in the country. I worked regular assignments, and then I worked some more specialized assignments, fugitive recovery, fugitive task forces. I worked those. So there's that. So I've been very blessed by God's grace to make it through 2 combat tours safely in one piece when a lot of other good men did not. I don't take any credit for that. Give God the glory. Also, by His grace, made it safely on some of the meanest streets in the country, in LA, and some of the worst neighborhoods, carrying a gun in all those situations. So I have that perspective. Also served in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard, and infantry is my primary MOS. So I have that. I'm very blessed to have made it through that safely. I also have been a firearms instructor professionally in civilian world and military and law enforcement world. I have certifications from all manner of 3-letter government agencies, all kinds of, alphabet soup government agencies, FBI, DOJ, DOE, a bunch of other ones. I worked for some of the most secure sites in the country as a private contractor, teaching small arms and weapons tactics and advanced weapons, all manner of weapons. I did that professionally. Like I said, I taught on the civilian side professionally for many years. NRA certified instructor for what that's worth. A bunch of other stuff that I'm probably forgetting. But anyway, as you can tell, I've been blessed with a very large variety of firearms background. Also, hunting and fishing, I've hunted everything from little tiny gray squirrels on the East Coast to prairie dogs on the West Coast, and white-tailed deer on the East Coast, and mule deer and elk on the West Coast, and bear and wolf and all those things. I've been very blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country. So there's that as well. So that's a little bit about myself in the background. And I know right now, the reason I'm recording this, I already had a podcast we recorded for pretty much this time, but I'm going to do another one, this one, because with everything going on right now, with the quarantine and the nation so afraid of all different things and worrying, which is never good, there's a lot of first-time gun buyers, which is great. I wish they would just have done that years ago and not panic bought a bunch of guns or are looking at getting guns for panicking reasons and fear reasons. You should never do anything out of fear. But a lot of people are. So there's a lot of new-time gun buyers, and a lot of them don't have a lot of knowledge. So you may be listening to this with a lot of knowledge, but even so, as the Bible says, as Jesus says, no prophet has honor in his own country. So it may be easier for you to shed some light on it by giving them or sharing this podcast with them and saying, hey, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. Why don't you give what he has a listen? So today is going to be a broad overarching topic of firearms for survival, for hard times, for when times are not normal, whatever you want to call it, for without rule of law, for without, the natural order of things, for food procurement, for protection, for all those different things. So I will get into that, and I don't want you to I would like for you to consider what I'm saying, and if you have your own notions or preconceived notions, I'm not asking you to abandon those. I'm just asking you to challenge them and temper them with reality. So, and this may be very basic, but you have a couple different categories of firearms. You have rifles, handguns, and shotguns. You'll call those your big categories. So obviously a handgun, it can be a pistol, which is a semi-automatic, which means you have a magazine and the weapon and it loads itself. You can have a revolver, which it has a revolving cylinder, an easy way to remember it. Both have some advantages. We'll get into that a little bit more. And then you also have shotguns and rifles. Now a shotgun is called a shotgun because it's fired what's called shot. If you think about this when you're a kid, if you pick up a really big rock and throw it, that's kind of like your rifle. It's a more precise projectile, but you've got one of them. A shotgun, it fires what's called shot. Think about when you were a kid and you pick up a handful of gravel and you throw it, and it flies through the air, and you have it spreads out into what's called a pattern. The shotgun does the same thing at a much higher velocity. So it has a bigger spread of projectiles, making it more likely to hit a target that's moving, let's say. But it also, obviously, every time you decrease an object's mass, it slows down quicker. So it has a shorter range than a rifle does. So you want to think about that. One's not better than the other. It's situationally dependent. If somebody let's picture that little kid, and the game is to hit somebody with a rock. So if you got somebody running away from you, like on a playground, it might be better to pick up a handful of gravel and throw it at them. Whereas if they're standing far away off and you're trying to hit them with a rock, maybe picking up that one rock and taking your time and really trying to get a good throw and launching it a long way. And that would be like your rifle. It's kind of oversimplifying it, but that's a good way to think about it if you're new to guns. So, what is the best tool for survival for the first-time gun buyer, for maybe the person that has guns or has guns passed down but has never really thought about, wow, I might really have to take care of my family. Like, it's not just somebody else's responsibility. It's my responsibility as a man to take care of my family, or a woman for that matter. You're the head of the household. It's your responsibility to take care of you and yours. So what's the best tool for that? And I'm going to say, if you want the best, if you don't know much about guns at all, you don't know much about safety, you've never really trained, I'm going to say the best utilitarian tool, bang for your buck thing that you can get is a break open shotgun. Single shot, old school, affordable. Usually they have a hammer. There's a couple reasons for this. One, they're inherently safe. They're fairly long, so it's a lot harder to accidentally shoot yourself like it is with a handgun. You can still do it, but it's much less likely. Also, most of them have an exposed hammer, meaning you open the gun, you break it open, literally it's called a break open shotgun. You break it open, you can literally see if it's loaded or unloaded. You put a round in, you shut it, then you have to cock the hammer, which means you can look at it and tell if it's loaded or unloaded. So, as safe as a firearm can be, it's still a deadly weapon. It still has to be treated with respect, but very safe. And everybody, Glock 19s and AR-15s are the cool whiz-bang thing, and trust me, I have a ton of them. Not a ton. I have more than I need, and they have their place. But a shotgun is very utilitarian. It's very versatile in shot. For the things that you're envisioning, most likely for, a home invasion or something like that in a time where people are worried about protecting their family. If you look at the power in like a 12 gauge double-aught buckload or a 12 gauge slug or any kind of round like that, it's far superior to what you're going to get in a handgun. And yes, if you have something like a Glock 19 9mm handgun, it might have 15 rounds. But generally, your first round or 2 rounds is much more important than the 14th or 15th in the magazine. And if you don't know how to grip a pistol properly, pistols require a lot of training to use well and efficiently, and to draw and sight in, and are much harder to hit a target with. You still have to aim a shotgun, but they're much easier to teach and be proficient with than a handgun. A handgun takes quite a bit of skill to use. There's a reason why in World War II, they were issuing the 1911 handgun, and they found out without a lot of training it wasn't super effective, so they came up with what was called the M1 carbine. There's a reason for that, because the handguns do require a lot of practice and a lot of training, and if that's not you, this is called gunfighter life. So if you're a gunfighter, that probably is you. But if for somebody you're trying to get them their first gun or looking for what to get somebody with no training, I would not advise a handgun. It just requires more training, more practice. It's more likely that they're going to injure themselves or somebody else. Every American has a right to own a gun, and every American should own a handgun. But if you're panicking about a bunch of stuff and looking for that first gun to get to learn the basics, I would not advise a handgun. If you are, we'll get into handguns in a minute. But that break-open single-shot shotgun, before the craziness, you could get them at Walmart for less than $100. And you could get a whole case of 12 gauge birdshot to practice with for $20, which is 100 rounds, and you could get a box of slugs and double-aught buck at Walmart, and you'd be well suited for pretty much everything. Another big reason for the shotgun is, let's look at this realistically. Now, I'm a gunfighter, and I fought 2 wars, and I've worked on some of the meanest streets in LA, and I've had to use my gun. I've had to draw my gun. I've been a door kicker in Iraq. But even for myself, think about this, and I heard this from another podcast, Jack Spirko, I'll give him the credit, the Survival Podcast, and he said this years and years ago, and it always stuck with me, that Take how many times in your life you've been in a violent confrontation where you've had to defend yourself with physical force. It doesn't even have to be a gun. It could be with your hands. Just anytime you've had to physically defend yourself with physical violence. Take that number, think about it in your head, and double it to be safe. And then take that number and multiply it by 10. And think of whatever that number is in your head. Whether that's 10 or whether that's 10,000. Now think of the number of times in your life that you've had to eat. How many times in your life have you had to eat? Just assume 3 meals a day. Every year since you were old enough to feed yourself. Now think about that number. Now when it comes to putting food on the table, like I said, I've hunted all over this country, and I've gone out into the wilderness with just a Bible and a shotgun and survived off the land. And when it comes to putting food on the table, nothing does that better than a shotgun. Nothing does that better than a shotgun. That AR-15 is great for a battlefield weapon, but it's not going to do you much good if you got to shoot small game. Even if you were awesome, one of the best shots in the world, and you could shoot doves out of the air with that AR-15, you're not going to be much left to eat when you shoot them. The shotgun is the most versatile small arm the average civilian can own. You can hunt anything from literally a chipmunk or a dove up to a brown bear. In fact, that's what most wilderness guides in Alaska use for brown bear protection, is a 12-gauge shotgun with slugs. So you can hunt and take game and protect yourself with the same weapon, whether it's a dove, to a grouse, to a duck, to a deer, to anything, to protecting yourself. The shotgun will do all those things. And they are very versatile because the ammunition is very versatile. And I'm not going to get into it on this episode of this podcast. I did a whole nother episode on the shotgun. You can look it up and listen to it. But just by changing shot sizes from like a number 6 for hunting, smaller birds to, buckshot for hunting larger game, to slugs for getting a little bit farther out there and hunting even bigger game or game at longer distances. The shotgun is very versatile, and the shotgun is a very good home defense tool. It's a very good defensive tool if you keep it in your car, depending on local laws or whatever. It's a great tool for that, and it's a great tool for training beginners. So don't overlook that shotgun. I said the single shot for a first-time user. A lot of people say the pump, and I like a pump. I own a pump. I've hunted with a pump. I've taken many game with a pump. When I was a police officer in LAPD, my cruiser shotgun was an 870. I loved it when it came to kicking down doors and doing stuff. Even though I could take an AR as a police officer, I often took the shotgun. In fact, most times I took the shotgun because it's a better tool for the job at close distances. Pump shotgun is great, but it's not. Everybody says pump shotguns don't malfunction. But they do malfunction and they do jam, and a lot of times with new shooters, they do take some level of training. A lot of times you'll see new shooters, they'll pump the shotgun when there's a round in there, or they'll fail to fully close the action so it won't fire, or they'll tend to do what's called short stroke it. Especially even trained police officers, when they get scared or excited, they'll try and pump the weapon too quickly, and they'll cause a malfunction. And the gun won't fire. You don't have that problem with a single shot. Do you get a higher cadence and rounds and volley of fire with a pump shotgun than a single shot? Sure you do. But you're more likely to have a malfunction. With the single shot, if you know how to use it, that first round is basically assured. Whereas with a pump shotgun, you got to worry about, was the safety on, was the safety off? With a single shot, you can look at it and tell. Hammer's back, all I got to do is pull the trigger. Or the hammer's not back, I gotta pull the hammer back and pull the trigger. So you have that. Double barrels are kind of halfway in between. They're still very good. The problem is they're more expensive. So if money's not an object, maybe look at that. The pump shotgun is not a bad choice, but I'm saying you got to train with it more. Semi-autos are great. They're my go-to. Benelli, anything from a Benelli M1 to a Benelli M4. Any of the Mossbergs or Remingtons are fairly reliable. They do require a little bit more maintenance, and they are much, much more expensive than a pump action. You can get a good single shot before the crunch happened, before this happened. You could get a good single shot for under $100. You could get a fair You could get a fair pump action shotgun for $150, and you could get a good pump action shotgun, Mossberg or Remington, for $300. A good semi-auto that's reliable is going to cost you 3 times that. So you're looking at 3 times the cost of a single shot for a pump and 3 times the cost of a pump for a semi-auto. So if money is no object to you, then money is no object to you. I like the semi-auto because I train with it all the time, and for me the advantages outweigh it. But if you have a limited budget and you're worried about feeding your family, you might want to spend that extra money on ammo and wheat and lentils and whatever, and get a cheaper shotgun with more ammo than a really expensive shotgun with a box of ammo that you haven't even trained with. You're better getting a single shot and training with it and being proficient with it than getting a super whiz-bang semi-auto Benelli M4 and not having money to practice it with ammo. Or buying that super fancy shotgun and then only having buckshot and then having to feed your family and realizing you can't really shoot doves with buckshot. And you can't really shoot doves very well that are flying through the air with a tactical shotgun like you can with a good sporting shotgun. So whatever you choose for somebody for their first time gun purchase, I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying consider these things and don't feel like you have to have, what's cool in a movie or what's cool on TV or think that that's best for you. Be practical and think about it. As far as handguns go, if you want a handgun, for whatever reason, you think you might want it or it's your second gun, you want a gun that you can keep on you, that's the main advantage of handguns. The reason that handguns exist is not because they're better at any given task. Generally, it's because you can have them with you at all times. Very impractical to go walking around the store with an AR slung across your back or a shotgun. It's very hard to, garden with a shotgun on. But you can do all those things with a handgun. Handguns are light, they're maneuverable, they're easy to conceal. That's the main advantage of handguns. So if that's what you're looking at, I would say get something with a simple operator's manual. Now revolvers, a lot of people overlook them today because it's 2020 and the revolver's old and it seems outdated. But the revolvers has a few advantages. We'll get into those. One is a lot of people say they're simpler. They're not really simpler. If you take a revolver apart, they're much more complex and have more moving parts than, let's say, a Glock, a very common semi-auto. And they are not any more reliable. I've shot a bunch of both, and revolvers do malfunction. And when they do malfunction, they're generally out for the count. They generally can't be fixed by the user. They have to be fixed by a gunsmith. That's not really true. But they are simpler. A big advantage is they're simpler to train on because they have less things you have to worry about. They don't have a magazine that can be lost. You put the round directly in the weapon and you close the weapon. You put the rounds in the cylinder and close it. Therefore, you can't lose a magazine, like let's say a semi-auto, and you have it on you and you have to leave somewhere on foot, and then something happens and you hit the mag release and the magazine falls out, and now you have one round. Or it's some horrible California compliant version with a magazine disconnect, and if you lose the magazine, the gun literally won't fire. So that's a big advantage to the revolver. Yeah, you may only have 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 rounds, usually 6, but those rounds are in the gun and you really can't lose the cylinder. So that's a big advantage. There's 2 main kinds, a single action and a double action. Single action meaning the old cowboy kind where you have to cock the hammer first. I'm not saying you can't have one of those. If you're looking for it for defense, I would get a double action, which means you can either pull the trigger and just cock the hammer and release it, 2 actions, double action, or you can cock the hammer like an old school cowboy revolver. I would get something at 38 Special, 357. A 357 will also fire 38 Specials. I would say stay away from anything Magnum, like a 357 Magnum, 44 Magnum, unless you're really trained on it, because the harder it is, the more punishing it is, and the slower it is to get follow-up shots really don't outweigh the benefits. I would say stick with, even if you have a gun that'll fire, stick with 44 Special or 38 Special. So you have those. They're good if you're gonna loan a gun to somebody for their first time and they want a handgun. I don't mean this to be sexist, but a lot of women they want a handgun because it's a smaller gun and they think smaller, less scary. But handguns are harder to shoot, they're harder to hit a target with, they're less effective, they're less powerful. But if somebody just wants a handgun, then a good old school 38 Special revolver is not a bad choice. If you're gonna go semi-auto, any of the modern polymer striker fire semi-autos are a good choice. There's a big debate whether you want a safety or not a manual safety. I don't really care. I will tell you that if you need a gun, you probably need it right now, and unless you're trained on it, the person with the safety, I've seen it. I've taught a bunch of training classes with a bunch of different guns. Generally, if somebody has a safety on their gun at some point in the course of a class, they will inevitably, even if they've trained on it a ton, they will draw that gun and forget to take the safety off because they're in a hurry, and the gun will not go off. And if that's a real world situation and you need that gun to go off right now, then you're dead. So I would say if you can avoid it, don't get a gun with a safety. If you just are new to guns and it makes you nervous to have a gun without a manual safety and you want a safety because it makes you feel better, I'm not saying you're wrong, get a gun with a safety, but just realize that there's a reason most police officers and most modern handguns are made without a manual safety. That being said, if you're looking at 940 or 45, get a 9mm. Unless you're borrowing it from somebody, then you get what you get, or you can only get one or two guns. But the 9mm is the easiest to shoot effectively, generally cheaper, although in these times you kind of get what you can get when you have an ammo shortage. But 940 or 45, one thing I will say, if you're new to guns, make sure that your gun is rated for the ammo that you buy and you're shooting it. Especially in times like this, you end up with all kinds of weird ammo floating around. Make sure that it looks clean and serviceable. Make sure that it actually fits that gun. I mean, if the internet's still up and running, make sure you look and Google and make sure the ammo is safe for that gun. There have been quite a few training accidents with people shooting ammo that's not rated for their gun. You know, if the gun's not rated for plus P ammo, don't put plus P ammo in it. It's not worth the risk. But handguns, if you are going to get a handgun, don't just buy it and think that it just magically makes you safe because you own it. You have to train with it, and you have to train with a handgun far, far more than you have to train with anything else. I roll around my everyday job. I didn't mention in the bio, but my everyday job is I'm the commander of a tactical team, and I train all the time. I practice every day with firearms, and I practice with a handgun far more than I practice with any other gun because it is the hardest gun to master. So if you're going to get a handgun for that first time weapon, you need to train with that far more than you would train with a rifle or a shotgun. So if you're going to get a handgun, then you need to train with it. Don't just think that magically you buying one and tucking it away makes you safe. You know, buying a handgun and buying a Glock 19, because that's what cops have, and buying the ammo that a cop has and putting it underneath your bed does not make you a gunfighter any more than buying a nice Fender Stratocaster and never practicing with it makes you a rock star. Like, just because you have it doesn't mean you can play it. Just because you own a gun doesn't mean you can shoot it. So keep that in mind. Next, we'll talk about rifles. A lot of people right now freaking out about an AR-15. It's a great weapon. I love AR-15s. They're not my favorite. I went to war with AR-15s. I used them as a contractor. I've had a few catastrophically fail, meaning they could not be fixed. They were broken for good. Thankfully, I had like a backup M9, or I had a squad of men that had serviceable weapons because mine was down. You have those. I'm not saying they're my favorite, but I'm saying they're good weapons. They work. They're fine. They've been serving the military for 50 years. With this little break in between the original episodes, I want to say don't forget to go to goodshepherdtraining.com and become a patron. We left off with the AR-15, and that's where I'm going to pick it up today. Now, we did an entire podcast. You want to go back and listen to it on the AR versus the AK. This is those new aspiring gunfighters or the first-time gun owners that went out and bought an AR. So they've gone out, they've bought it, and now what? Because going out and buying a gun does not make you a gunfighter. Just like going out and buying a Fender Stratocaster just because it's like one a Rockstar plays does not make one a Rockstar. Just buying a guitar and bringing it home and putting it under your bed does not make you a musician any more than buying an AR-15 makes you a soldier. So, if you don't have any training, we'll get into that later, but the AR-15, a lot of people are going out right now buying their first gun. A lot of times, that's the AR-15. There's some goods and some bads to that. The AR-15 is not the worst choice you could get for a first-time gun. It has a lot of benefits. Benefit number one, it has low recoil. Benefit number two, it's a lot of fun to shoot because of that. So, it's a gun that is not, it may look big and scary and it may scare politicians or whatnot, but as far as shooting, it's a very pleasant, fun gun to shoot. It has low recoil. It is a very inherently accurate gun. That's another good benefit of it. So I guess that'd be benefit number 3. It's, I wouldn't say super lightweight, but for most rifles, it's fairly lightweight. So that's another good benefit. It's fairly modular and adjustable, so that could be another benefit. You might also put that in the detriment category. But those are some benefits of that rifle. Now, some of the hindrances of the AR-15 for your first rifle, and by AR-15 I mean M16, M4 pattern variants, A1, A2, AR-10s, I'm lumping them all in together. Anything on the AR stoner build kind of working mechanism, direct impingement, piston, doesn't really matter. I'm kind of lumping those all in together. One of the things about those is they have a very complex manual of arms and what we call PMCS in the military, or maintenance schedule. So they're not super forgiving of neglect. The AR-15s are not. They're not known for that. During the war in Iraq, I had one catastrophically fail on me, and it was something I maintained. I mean, Marines maintain their weapons very well, but it had a catastrophic failure, and right in the middle of a war, meaning that it could not be repaired unless you took it to like a licensed gunsmith in the Marine Corps. Like, it was not something that you could just tap, rack, bang, and fix the malfunction. It was legit broken forever until it got fixed. So they're not very forgiving of neglect, and they do malfunction. If you take any good AR-15 class, a big chunk of that class, so like, I don't know, as much as 20 to 30% of it is just fixing malfunctions, because that gun does malfunction. And it malfunctions if you really know what you're doing and you maintain it well and you lubricate it well. It's still malfunctioning. You got to know how to fix it. Even more so if you're a brand new person to a gun and you buy it and you don't know how to use it and maintain it, it's going to malfunction even more. If you don't know how to properly insert the magazine, tap it and tug it. If you don't know how to properly load the magazine and tap the back of it so that all the rounds seat properly. Like I said, if you're running cheap crap steel cased ammo through it, all those things add to give even more malfunctions. So that's a big detriment if it's your first time gun. Another one is they are a freaking pain in the butt. I'm talking about the traditional direct impingement, not a piston gun, but they are a pain in the butt to clean. I can almost clean every other gun that I own in the time that it takes to properly and thoroughly clean one AR-15. Because there's a bunch of little tiny parts. That's another big thing. If you lose one, you're kind of screwed, because if you're brand new to guns, you probably aren't stockpiling spare extractors and spare, bolt parts and spare bolt pins. Because if you lose one, then your gun's useless. A lot of guns don't have things like that you can lose and have to worry about. So that's another big detriment. They're fairly hard to take apart and put back together. I know every soldier listening to me now is like, no, they're not. But you got to remember that you had, a week's worth of training on that gun probably before you were even allowed to fire it, on how to maintain it and how to strip it apart and put it back together and clean it. And most people going out buying that first AR, they don't have that. And if you think the AR is just a gun you're going to take out to the range and shoot and then not clean and then put it away in a closet, and then when you need it, it's going to be ready to go, that's not that gun. If you want that gun, get a single shot shotgun or a pump shotgun, where I wouldn't advise it, but you could probably take it out and shoot it and never clean it and give it to your grandkids, and it would just still fire just fine. They're very forgiving of neglect. The AR-15 is not that gun. If you want an assault rifle to do that, then look at the AK. But the AR-15 is not that gun. There's a lot of benefits to the AR-15, but it's got a lot of quirks too. They're very mag finicky. The mags on them don't last forever. And it's another big detriment. So know that weapon. If it's your first gun, I'm not saying it's the wrong choice or it's a bad choice. I think every red-blooded American man should have an AR-15 and train with it and know how to use it. But for the new user, it's not the most friendly thing to get into. So keep that in mind if that's your first AR-15. Learn how to use it, learn how to maintain it. Practice with it, practice loading it and unloading it without ever firing a shot. I'd say the big chunk of your practice, if you just bought it, you should practice quite a bit with it, loading it and unloading it and clearing malfunctions and things like that before you even fire a shot in it. Learn how to completely take it apart and put it back together and clean it. This is the day of YouTube. This is an audio podcast. You are much easier to learn if you YouTube how to fix a malfunction, how to fix a type 1, type 2, type 3, whatever they call it, a double feed, a triple feed, a failure to fire. Learn how to fix those things. If you have an AR, those things happen. And if you're a guy that's thinking that never happens with my AR, then you just haven't trained with it enough. If you go out and put several thousands and thousands of rounds through your rifle, sooner or later you'll have a malfunction. And ARs tend to be fairly heavy on the malfunctions, both in the different kinds they can get and the different ways to fix them. So make sure you're aware of that. If you have a brand new AR and you've never zeroed it, it's kind of worthless to you. Unless you have to defend yourself and the person runs right up to the end of your muzzle, then you have to sight that weapon in. And you have to know, if you can go back, we did a whole nother podcast on BZOing your weapon. You can go back and listen to that. But you have to have that weapon sighted in. Because if not, it's kind of useless to you. Just like I said, just having it and buying it and putting it under your bed, that's not a thing. That's not how weapons work. You have to sight it in and train with it. You have to know what ammo it likes and what it doesn't like. You have to know what ammo it's sighted in for. And right now, you might just kind of be stuck with whatever ammo you can get. If you can only get 100 rounds, you better train with, 60 of those rounds and keep the rest for defense, but don't keep all of them and not shoot it. I've seen plenty of guns straight from the factory that don't work. Anyway, that's enough on the AR-15. Let's move to some other guns for the first-time buyer that we didn't cover in the last episode. The next one would be a 22, and I think this is a much better choice. Is it as good round for defense as an AR-15 or an AK? No, it's not. But they're a lot of fun to shoot. Something like a 1022 or a Marlin Model 60 or any of your bolt actions. They're very cheap and affordable. They're super fun to train with. They're super good for learning the fundamentals. So something like that, can you use it for defense? You sure can. And you can also take small game with it. Everybody thinks that in the apocalypse times you're going to run out and live off deer they've scavenged. And like I said, I've hunted deer all over this beautiful country. But even the best deer hunter will tell you that deer are hard to find in normal times and hard to hunt in normal times. You might go an entire season and not get a good shot on a deer. And let alone when you're in hard times, you haven't showered for a week and you stink and you're trying to sneak up on a deer in the woods. So keep that in mind. You might be much better off with squirrel and rabbits and quail and chucker, wherever you are, whatever kind of small game there are in the country, marmots, whatever. You may be far better off trying to put meat on the table with that. And in that situation, the 22 is really going to shine for you. Whereas like the AR-15, yeah, you can shoot a squirrel with an AR-15, but there's not going to be much left to eat when you do. So think about that. The 22, I would say ammo is cheap, but right now, and this time, no ammo is cheap. But if it's your first time purchase, if it were me advising somebody and they were choosing between an AR-15 and an AK or a Ruger 1022 for their first gun, even if it was primarily for defense, I'd steer them towards a 1022. Much easier to clean, much easier manual of arms. You can just buy some brake parts cleaner or some gun scrubber and just spray it down and spray some oil in it and run the action a couple times, and it'll keep running and running and running most of the time. Sure, they can be ammo finicky, but so can an AR-15. Also, 22 pistols, if you can get one of those are great trainers. They're great to learn on, great to train with. They will also work in a defensive situation. They are not the best, but they are better to learn on. I'd rather have somebody well-trained with a 22 than somebody that just bought their first Glock 9mm with tritium night sights and a super sick Kydex holster, and they were able to get 50 rounds of ammo and they've never shot it. I'd rather have somebody with an old beat-up 22 single-action revolver that they train hundreds of rounds with and know how to use and know where it shoots. I'd rather have that person than the person with the slicked-out, brand-new Glock 17, like I said, with night sights and everything else that's brand new, clean in the box that they've never shot. Like I said, I have gotten guns, and some of them have been Glocks, straight brand new from the factory, that don't work. You got to think about gun companies. They make hundreds and thousands and millions of guns. Not every one is perfect. They have a variance in tolerances, and some don't work brand new from the factory. I've had it happen. I've had handguns come sometimes where the barrels weren't even rifled properly. I just had a guy go through training with a brand new gun, a very reputable manufacturer, and the barrel crown was messed up. It was literally splitting bullets apart when he was firing it. A brand new gun. That gun was basically useless. Brand new from the factory, and it's a very nice, expensive, well-made gun. Don't just assume because you bought a brand new gun that it works. It's not how that works. It's uncommon, but it does happen. I'd rather you have a 22 that you took out and found a 500-pound brick and practiced with 400 of those rounds and got good with it and kept the other 100 rounds for defense. So keep that in mind. That's pretty much all the major firearm types we've covered in part 1 and part 2. Well, we didn't cover some other things like the AK. The AK, if you're looking for your first weapon, I'd say is probably a better choice if you're new to guns than the AR. We did a podcast versus AR-15 versus AK-47. You might want to go back and listen to that. And they're both about even, I think. If we're being honest, you may prefer one over the other, but they're about even. But for the new-time gun owner, the AK really is a better choice. I'm going to go ahead and say that in my training and experience. There's a reason that they arm 12-year-old kids in Africa with AKs. I'm not saying that's a good thing. It is not a good thing. But the fact that a 12-year-old can use it and maintain it and use it effectively means that it's pretty forgiving for the first-time user. Not so much with the AR-15. The things I talked about, the AR, spare parts, and things breaking and malfunctions. AKs do malfunction occasionally. Yes, I know you might think AKs never malfunction, but they do. But the way to clear them, because they have a big, giant ejection port and they're not all enclosed like an AR, they're much easier to fix a malfunction. Even as somebody that doesn't know what's going on, if an AK malfunctions, they can kind of look at it. If you have any kind of mechanical background or common sense, you can kind of look and be like, oh, let me just pull the charging handle, and it fixes it. It's pretty easy. So I would say for a first-time user, if you're choosing between the two, an AK is a better choice. I will go ahead and say that. I'm not saying it's a better rifle than the AR-15, but I'm saying for somebody with no training, it is. It is definitely better. Well, guys, talking about gunfighting, I did this on my way to the range, and I am now at the range, and I'm going to do some practicing. So I will leave you guys to it. Gunfighters, aspiring gunfighters, if you have somebody looking at buying that first gun, maybe give them this podcast, episodes 1 and 2 of this, because you may know a lot and you might already be a gunfighter, but a lot of times, as the Bible says, the prophet has no honor in his own country. They may want to listen to somebody else. They may feel insulted if you're trying to instruct them, especially if it's a wife or a brother or an uncle. They may think that you're trying to act like you know more than them. And even if you do know more than them, sometimes it's easier to give them a third-party perspective. So maybe you'll pass this along. Hope it helps. That's the whole reason I'm doing it for the benefit of society. On that note, if you are a gunfighter and you have some training, if you've been a soldier or a Marine or a police officer and you have some handgun training, rifle training, and you know somebody that bought that first gun, take some time, take out a new shooter and teach them how to shoot. That's all I'll say in closing. Thanks, guys, and have a blessed day. With this little break in between the original episodes, I want to say don't forget to go to goodshepherdtraining.com and become a patron. So I'm going to start a series entitled Survival Guns. I'm going to put that out there, and it's going to have to be a series. I was thinking about doing an episode this morning, but there's no way to cover survival guns in an episode. It's too big a topic. So I think today's episode will be the number 1 survival gun. And this, everybody's got their own thoughts and opinions and everything like that. But and I'm no different. And we all have our favorites and our biases, and I'm no different. They're shaped by hopefully real world things, though. They're not just some theory from an armchair. They're actual real world experiences. So I'm just going to submit that the best survival weapon all around, with no other caveats, no other, what about this scenario, what about that situation, what about this environment, just overall broad reaching, what is the best survival firearm? I'm going to say that it's a shotgun. There are several different makes and models, and I've been through this, and I literally did this thought experiment myself, and over long periods of time and development, I settled for myself, I'll just let you know up front, the Benelli M2, which is a semi-automatic 12 gauge. I have it with an 18-inch barrel with rifle sights. It's not like the super ultra tactical ghost ring set up with a pistol grip and everything. It's more of a hunting configuration, but it has rifle sights. And I use that all the time for everything. It often stays behind the front seat of my car for urban environments, for tactical situations, and for going out in the wilderness. It's kind of my go-to hiking in the wilderness gun. And I've done many wilderness excursions, and if I only bring one gun, generally, sometimes it's a 22 depending on where I'm at, but usually it's a 12-gauge shotgun. So I'm going to submit to you that the ultimate survival gun, if you're only going to have one for every environment, is the 12-gauge shotgun. I'll say the shotgun. Now, I won't say the 12-gauge for everybody. There's a lot of things to be said for the 12 and the 12 gauge, the 20 gauge, and the 410. There's some other gauges, the 16 and the 28, but they're a little bit rare, so we won't really discuss those. The other ones have a lot of merit and some advantages. But for me, I was just so invested in 12 gauge, being in law enforcement and military, and just having a lot of 12 gauge, that I've kind of partnered up with that caliber, with that gauge, and that's the one that I've chosen. But I definitely would say that a 20 gauge semi-auto, or even a 410 good semi-auto, I would say, because if the thing about it is that when you drop down in the gauge, you're able to carry more ammo. And you might say that carrying more ammo is more important than having the 12 gauge to more lethality. But and I wouldn't fault you for that. Couple of reasons. First of all, why the shotgun? The shotgun is the most versatile small arm, period. With that gun of mine, or with most shotguns, I can take anything in North America. Anything from a chipmunk or a Tweety bird, and don't think that you can't get so hungry as to not eat a chipmunk or a Tweety bird. It happens. So I can take anything from a chipmunk to a Tweety bird to a big giant grizzly bear. In fact, most bear guides, that's their defensive gun to protect them from bears. The number one thing they use is a 12 gauge wood slugs. So right there, I can take anything, and some people will say it's a close range weapon, but it's like anything else. You put the time and effort in to train with it, and you get a good gun and good sights and good quality ammo and match it. I've had several Benelli shotguns that will touch slugs at 50 yards, meaning they'll put one ragged hole. They'll put the slug in the same place every single time with just plain iron sights. That's plenty accurate enough. It's plenty good enough. It's a good 100-yard, 150-yard weapon with slugs, and it is devastating. A slug is a devastating weapon, far more than most small arms. And in most survival situations, 150 yards is plenty. 100, and you could kill. The shotgun slug is deadly farther out than that, but I would say for most people, 100 to 150 yards, good practical real world accuracy, and it is devastating. It is a devastating tool and a devastating weapon. Buckshot, I know people say buckshot's only good at 20 yards, 25 yards. It really depends on you. If you get good, I'm a big fan of the Federal Flight Control. If you get good, and this is just with a straight cylinder bore, I can keep all my rounds on a silhouette at 50 yards with double up buck with flight control. So a good 50-yard weapon with buckshot, and buckshot is devastating. And often when I worked LAPD, when I worked law enforcement, even if I could have an M4 or other rifle, I'd often grab the shotgun, especially if I was going in an urban environment room to room. It is a more devastating weapon. Yeah, you might not have 30 rounds. You may have 5 to 7 to 9 rounds. But gunfighting in real life is not... You're probably not going to need 30 rounds. Usually the first person to get a good, solid, debilitating hit wins the gunfight, and a shotgun does that. And a shotgun does that, I would submit, to 50 yards, better than anything else, and as good as anything else, out to 100 to 150, and maybe less past that. But in a survival situation, you're probably not taking shots longer than that. And yeah, is there times in hunting where you might want a longer shot than that? Yes. If we're talking a straight hunting for big game gun, I might not pick the 12 gauge for all around unless I was east of the Mississippi. But in a survival situation, I found often when I'm hiking and trying to get from one place to another, most of the shots I'm taking are jump shots or running shots. I'm not sitting there watching, because then I'm in a hunting scenario, not a survival scenario. And there is differences. And the shotgun does that better than anything else. And if I'm in a survival situation of wilderness, yeah, I might take a deer, but I may also have to take a groundhog. I may also have to take something else to feed my dog, to feed myself. There may be a myriad of other things that I might take. I might take, now check your local game laws. I'm not advising you to break any laws, but in survival situations, you can take fish with a shotgun. You can take duck. You can take geese. You can take any number of those things, where if all I have is a high-powered rifle or an AR, I can't do those things. So the shotgun gives me that incredible versatility to hunt everything from a Tweety bird to a grizzly bear. And it gives me great defensive capability, great anti-personnel capability with buckshot and with shotgun slugs. So I would submit to you that the shotgun is the ultimate survival weapon. Does it have drawbacks? Yes, it has a few. Limitations, round count, it doesn't have as many. And I'm talking about survival. If you think about, you've heard my background, the number of gunfights I've been in my life, I can count on both hands and have fingers left over. Legitimate. And most of you probably, maybe some people have more than that. But however many gunfights you've been in your life and lived, you've had to feed yourself more than that, far more than that. You have to feed yourself pretty much every day. And the shotgun puts food on the table better than everything else. So we're talking about broad survival, both defense and putting food on the table. I would submit that the shotgun is the go-to tool. Nothing competes with it for flexibility. And you don't know what your situation is going to be. I would submit that. For me, I've settled on the 12 gauge. But there's a big argument to be made for other gauges. If you live east of the Mississippi, I would say a 410 is amazing. There's nothing east of the Mississippi you can't kill with a 410. I grew up hunting with a 410 east of the Mississippi. And do you get more pellets? You get more knockdown power with a 12 gauge? Yes, of course you do. But how many pellets does it take to kill a gray squirrel, to kill a jackrabbit, to kill a grouse? If you get 5 good pellets in that animal, it doesn't matter that you have 700 more in a 12 gauge. So I would submit to you that the 410 is just as good, and it's lighter, and you can carry more ammo. So there's a lot of advantage to the 410 there. The frames are smaller. They're great. And then you've got the 20 gauge. The 20 gauge is also great. The 20 gauge is a kind of in between the 410 and the 12. Now the 20 gauge, I would submit, will kill anything in North America. A 20 gauge slug will definitely kill a bear. 20 gauge buckshot is definitely deadly enough for, and slugs are good enough for defensive use, for home invasions, break-ins, anything like that. The 20 gauge is lighter, and the guns are a little bit lighter, but for me they're not much lighter, and I'll give up a couple of rounds. Just there's only so many guns you can have, and only so many things you can have. And generally, 12 gauge shells, I like to train and I like to shoot and I like to store ammo. If you're a survivalist, you probably want to store ammo. 12 gauge is as cheaper than 20 gauge often, and it's more devastating. And it's usually available in a broader selection of rounds and easier to find. So for those reasons, I would give the edge to the 12 gauge. But I would say, for me, I've got the 12, but I would say it's probably a tie between the 12 and the 20. Because you give up a little bit, but you gain a little bit. A little bonus for you guys, if you don't know what gauge means. If you take the diameter of the barrel, the bore, and you make a lead ball of that size, however many it takes of that size to make a pound is the gauge. It takes 12, it takes a dozen round lead balls to equal a pound in 12 gauge. It takes 20 to equal a pound in 20 gauge. That's why the bigger the gauge, the smaller the shotgun. Now, for me, a lot of people are going to say the pump shotgun is the way to go. And I would say the pump shotgun is the way to go if you're on a budget. I've got a lot of training with the Remington 870. It's a great gun. And people will say they don't jam, they don't malfunction. That's BS. If you've ever trained a lot and if you've ever seen somebody in stressful situations, pump action shotguns absolutely can malfunction a lot of times because it's shooter induced. Somebody freaks out and they short stroke it because they're trying to go really fast and they cause a malfunction. Or they will rack it because they don't know that there's a shell in there, and they'll eject a live shell on the ground. Or they'll be injured and they can't rack the shotgun with one hand. For all those reasons, for me, if you're not on a budget, the semi-auto is the way to go. I've had several Benelli shotguns, an M1 Super 90, an M2, and an M4, and they've all been as reliable or more reliable than pumps. The only reason for the pump I would submit is, I guess there's two. One would be budget. You can get a super reliable pump shotgun for $150 to $300. Very good. If you want to get that in a semi-auto, it's going to cost you $900 to $2,000. So if for me, that's not really an issue because I'm going to spend what it takes to get the best tool for the job. But if you are on a budget, I'd rather have you with a pump action shotgun and 1,000 rounds that you're highly trained in than you sitting there dreaming about the Benelli shotgun that you can't afford for 4 years. So I would say that's an advantage, affordability. Another advantage is you can shoot very, very low recoil rounds, like less than lethal rounds, which in a survival situation you might, if there's riders, you may not want to kill them. You may want to shoot a rubber round or a less than lethal round. And you can cycle those with the pump where you cannot do that. The semi-auto generally won't cycle those, which is not a huge deal for me. I'll just single load them. But there are ways to do that. So there's that. That's why I say the semi-auto is the best. So you have that flexibility. But a good quality semi-auto, I would submit, is every bit as reliable, and you take the human error part out of it. So for me, and I had a Benelli M90 HK for years, and I sold it to get an M4, and I kind of wish that I had one of the guns I wish that I had kept. I got the M4, and some people might say the M4 is the epitome, but I had an M4, and it was great for like urban defensive use, but not for wilderness use. It was just too heavy. The barrel was super heavy. The gun was super heavy. So I settled on the M2, and I have an M2, and I have two different barrels for it. A vent rib barrel if I'm doing a lot of wing shooting, but for all-around general purpose, rifle-sighted, with a cylinder choke with a brake is how I run mine, and it is a fantastic gun. Magazine tube extension, and yeah, it's a little on the spendy side, but man, is it sweet, and it shoots great. And it will run pretty much everything except for like less than lethal rubber buckshot, but any kind of normal shotgun shell, it runs great. And so for me, that's what I settled on. You may have a different choice. You may want to run a 410, pump action, and that's fine. But I would submit for all-around survival, the shotgun is where it's at. I'll talk a little bit about how I run mine. I keep mine loaded with... Generally, most of the time, I keep it loaded with double-aught buck, and then on the side carry of the saddle, the hold shells in the stock, I carry that with 1 or 2 slugs and a couple more buckshot, because if I need it for defensive use, I'm not going to have time to load it. I need it right now. I need it to be loaded. So that's generally my go-to. Now, when I go out in the wilderness, it really depends on my environment, but I would advise you to carry a couple of different loads. I like number 6 lead shot for all-around small game hunting. It's good for anything from rabbits to turkey if you get a good headshot, to ducks and geese if you can get a good headshot. For survival situations, we're not it's a different game than shooting goose on the wing or shooting, ducks on the wing. You'd want something larger for that. But if you're trying to eat and survive, you're going to shoot it when it's stationary on the water. So you're going to get a headshot. So number 6 shot is fine for that. I also like number 4 buck. A lot of people will say double-aught buck's where it's at, but I prefer number 4 buck for most things. Number 4 buck gives you way more pellets, something like 30 or 40 something pellets, whereas you only get 9 pellets generally for double-aught buck. So I like number 4 buck. I've killed plenty of game with number 4 buck from bear to deer, and it is devastating. Number 4 buck is a great go-to round. And if you had to shoot something on the wing, you could shoot goose on the wing or duck on the wing or, turkey in the body with number 4 buck. And I'm not talking about legality, but if you're in a survival situation, you have to eat, then you pay the piper later with legality, but you have to eat. We were talking about survival, and number 4 buck is absolutely devastating. Defensive round, it's great. I know it's not as popular as number 4 buck, but it is amazing. Then I also have less lethal ammunition, because if I don't have to kill somebody, I don't want to unless I absolutely have to. And the world that we live in, and you heard what my day-to-day job is. I'm very much in a situation where rioting and looting is a normal occurrence here. Protests happen all the time, especially now. And if I don't have to kill somebody, I don't want to. That is a last resort. I'm not a psychopath, and unless you are, you don't want to kill somebody unless you have to. That's another big advantage of the shotgun. It gives you a less lethal option, and especially at distance. So I'd advise you to have some of that. If you don't know about shotguns, I did a whole nother podcast, a whole nother episode called Shotguns, a Forgotten Weapon. You can listen to that and learn a lot about different shotguns and shot sizes. But I would submit to you for our first episode that the shotgun, a good semi-auto shotgun with sights, is a good all-around survival weapon. When I go into the wilderness and I have to feed myself, that is what I take, and I would advise you to do the same. And it's great for defensive use too. So for all-around, I would submit that the shotgun with good sights and good variety of ammo is the best survival tool. Is it the sexiest? No. Is it, super long range? No. Is it super tactical, whatever? Not necessarily. But we're not talking about being super cool. We're talking about surviving. And at the end of the day, in order to be cool, you have to survive. So that is my ultimate go-to survival weapon. If you disagree, leave a comment. Tell me what yours is. I'm just, like I said, you never know what the scenario is going to be. Could there be a scenario where there's shotgun's not the best? Yeah, there could be a dozen. But I'm saying for all-around general survival gun, my go-to is the shotgun. Thanks for listening. Like I said, and comment and let me know what your best survival gun is, your favorite survival gun is. That's fine. Wherever you're listening, iTunes, Spreaker, wherever you like to listen. I'm going to call this an episode. Thanks, and have a blessed day. With this little break in between the original episodes, I want to say don't forget to go to goodshepherdtraining.com and become a patron. And especially with today's crazy times and all the rioting and looting and civil unrest that's going on and a bunch of other things. So I'm here to share those experiences with you. Today's is going to be part 2 of survival guns. We're going to talk about, if you didn't listen to the first one, you might want to go back and listen to it. It's the ultimate survival gun, so go back and listen to that. But today I'm going to call the close runner-up the 22 long rifle. And I'm still going to talk about long guns today. I'm going to talk about the 22 long rifle in a rifle, not in a pistol. But I'll consider the 22 long rifle the second best survival tool. And again, this is going to be a series. We're not talking about specific applications like hiking or things like that. We're talking about a broad survival tool. A survival gun, and you don't know what the survival situation is going to be. So I'm gonna put that out there as a caveat. There may be, obviously there's specific situations where one gun will be favored over another, but I'm talking about all around survival. Maybe urban environment, maybe backpacking, maybe escape and evasion, maybe all manner of different things. Who knows? Maybe you're just bugging out and getting from one place to another. So I would submit that the 22 is the second best. What the 22 has going for it, the ammo is very light, and that's really one of the big advantages. The gun we talked about yesterday, the shotgun, I'm basically limited to probably, if I'm mobile, less than 100 rounds of ammo. I can easily, with the 22, put 1,000 rounds of ammo on my person and not be weighed down. And 1,000 rounds of ammo is probably more than you're ever going to need. Short of leaving and going out in the wilderness forever, you're probably going to get resupplied or restocked or find ammo. 1,000 rounds is a lot of ammo. And you could carry, let's say, 300 rounds in little sleeves and it would weigh almost nothing. And the 22 rifle itself can be very light. I mean, obviously you can get all different configurations and make them very heavy, but just your general, from Walmart, off the rack 22 is going to be pretty light, south of 5 pounds. And you can get them much lighter than that. And that gives you a tremendous amount of gives you a tremendous amount of ammunition and ability for not a lot of weight. And if you've ever done anything, I didn't mention in my bio, but I've done quite a bit of like wilderness hiking and I've mentioned hunting, but literally going out into the wilderness with a gun and with a Bible and a gun and being very blessed to be able to put food on the table, as they say. And I've done that, and I've done a lot of different what you'd call survival scenarios. And the 22, that weight cannot be understated. If you're traveling long distance over land in rough terrain, you know, there's a big difference between a 6.5 pound rifle and a 3.5 pound rifle. And you may say, oh, it's only a couple pounds, but when you're trying to not just get from one place to another, but do it quickly and not be fatigued, because if you're fatigued, you're more likely to lose in a gunfight or to not notice something that's important to notice, like the edge of a cliff coming up or a rattlesnake or something like that. So fatigue is a real thing in the real world. If you get off the couch and get off of YouTube or whatever and get in the real world, fatigue is a thing, and 22s are lighter. So now, I'll be honest, when I do my wilderness excursions and I have to feed myself, I take the shotgun because it's more versatile. But like I said, there have been times, especially in the desert where there's not a lot of big game, where I will take the 22. So there's that. The 22 I would submit as the runner-up for the best all-around survival weapon. I would say that it's second to the shotgun, but not by much, and there's several advantages where you might pick it over. Like I said, if your main goal is not to hunt and forage for food, or your main goal is not for defense to protect yourself, but you just want to get from one place to another and you need something light and mobile, then yeah, you may favor the 22, and that's fine. 22s, now I don't think it should be a primary consideration. If you have the money, you should spend the money to get the best tool for the job. But I would rather you have a 22 and a bunch of ammo for it and train with it and know how to use it. And then if you need it, you have a 22 and a couple hundred rounds of ammo and you're very good with it, than a super awesome $2,000 AR-15 that you're saving up for, that you don't have anything when you need it. So 22s are affordable, and even when you get that super high-end AR, the 22 is great. You've heard my background, you've heard my bio. I do a lot of shooting, and I do most of my shooting training with a 22. I have 22s that are the same as my duty gun, more or less. Not exactly the same, obviously, but the same grip angles, the same. I configure them so that they're very conducive to switching back and forth in training. And obviously, I shoot a lot, and if I'm going to shoot a lot, I'd rather shoot a lot with the 22 because it's cheaper. And unless it's specifically recoil control, I can do all my practicing, my draws, my target transitions, my failure drills, two to the chest, one to the head. I can do all that stuff with the 22, and I can save money. And if I can, and I can shoot, I don't think, unless you're a millionaire out there listening to me, there's a limit to how much ammo you can buy. I guess even a millionaire would have a limit. But if I can train with a 500 rounds of 22, I'd rather do that than train with 50 rounds of 9mm. Or 100 rounds of 9mm even. And then just confirm everything every once in a while with my primary duty gun, which is an STI 2011. I'm very blessed to have a few that are my primary duty guns. When it comes to training, I do it with the 22. So back to survival with the 22. If you can get out and train with it all the time, you're better off with a 22 where you can make good consistent hits at a golf ball sized target at 50 yards, standing, kneeling, prone, and you're very well versed in it, than an AR that you never take out and shoot because it's too expensive or too loud or too whatever. I'd rather you have a gun that you're familiar with and that you shoot a lot, and 22s let you do that. Another thing I just touched on is that 22s are generally, they're not quiet, but they're quieter than a center fire rifle most of the time. Especially if you get a very long barrel 22. They can be very quiet and compared to other things, even a shotgun, much quieter. They won't be silent. Even with a silencer, it's not like Hollywood. Things aren't silent, but they're much quieter. So in a suburban survival scenario where you might have to take a shot on something to feed yourself and get out of there without being noticed, the 22 is quieter than most other guns. I'm talking about in a rifle, they're still pretty loud in a handgun. The 22 is deadly. Lots of people are killed with 22s. I'm not advocating it as your primary defensive gun, but if need be, it can be pushed into that role. There's been enough people killed with 22s that nobody can argue that a 22 is not deadly. Is it ideal? No. But we're not talking about ideal. We're talking about a good all-around survival weapon. And let's face it, you're probably more likely to have to feed yourself than get in a defensive situation. You've heard my background, and like I said in the podcast before, I can count the number of gunfights I've been in on my hands and my fingers and have a few left over. And that's, by God's grace, a lot more than most people will ever need to get in. But even in those experiences, no matter how many that is, even if you've had more than me, you've had to feed yourself far more. You have to feed yourself every day. And the 22 is great because as much as people fantasize and love to deer, and I love to deer hunt and elk hunt and everything, if you're, especially in a survival situation where you're probably moving, you're much more likely to get that small game on a Tweety bird or, you know, a rabbit or a chipmunk or whatever. And the 22 is okay for that. It's not as good as a shotgun. Yes, it's as good at killing those things, but a lot of times if you're moving, you get shots on the wing or on the jump, a jump shot, and a shotgun's better for that, but a 22 will do it. So I'd say for those situations, a 22 is okay. And a 22 is not great for deer, but with a good solid headshot, there's been enough deer killed like that you can't say that it's not effective. So 22 can be very effective. It can be pushed into a defensive role, but it's nowhere near as good as the shotgun, which is one of the reasons it gets a second tier for me. I'm going to say if you're going to get a 22 for all-around survival, I love bolt-action 22s. I got nothing against single-shot 22s or lever-action 22s, but if you're going to have an all-around survival gun, because it's limited in power, the 22 long rifle, it's got to be semi-auto. Obviously, my hat goes to the 1022. I have a 1022 that I bought when I was a kid. Had my mom go to Walmart and buy it for me. I still have it. I still shoot it. In fact, it's in my wife's trunk. It's kind of her go-to gun. It's one of her favorites, and she's good and familiar with it. I have a lot of big guns and battle rifles, an M1A and a SCAR. I'm very blessed to have those things. She shoots a 22 and she likes it, and she's good and accurate with it. So that's her go-to. And I practice what I preach. I'd rather her have a gun that she shoots and is familiar with it than a gun than some super fancy gun that she never shoots and doesn't know the dope and doesn't know how to load it and unload it. So it's a real world example. Carries a 22 in her trunk with a brick of ammo and some ammo in there. I also have a 1022 takedown that I like and I sell, and I sometimes take it second to the shotgun, but sometimes if I'm just going out to scout an area and hike and I may shoot some small game, especially in the desert where there's not a lot of big game, I'll take the 1022 takedown. It's great for that. It's as accurate as my standard 1022 all-weather. It's a great gun. It's a takedown. It's a semi-auto. And the reason I say the semi-auto is that if you had to push it into defensive role, one of the Russian leaders said that quantity has a quality all its own. So if you have to push it into a defensive role, you can put a lot of fast, accurate rounds on target with the 22. And several 22 long rifles into an adversary is preferable to one or two that you might get with a bolt action. Gunfights happen quick in the real world, and having that semi-auto capability, I'd say, is a must. And in the 22, you can get semi-autos that are very accurate, as accurate as I don't know if as accurate as the bolt action, but in practical real world senses, in real world environments for the shooter, as far as the shooter's capability is concerned, they're very accurate. And if you spend the money, they can be as accurate as anything else. I would say the 1022, the regular or the takedown. They also make the Henry. I've never owned one, but the Survival 22 semi-auto would be a great choice. It's very light. It's not as shootable. I've never owned one, and I try to talk from experience, but I can just tell by looking at it and from my experience, it doesn't have a forend. You have to grab it on the barrel, and it takes quite a bit longer to put together than the 1022, but it is far lighter. So you may look at that Air Force AR-7, I believe, survival rifle 22. The Air Force obviously chose it for all the reasons we mentioned today. So you may look at that one. My go-to is going to be the 1022. And I like just plain iron sights. I like put a good peep sight on it if you want. The 1022 does have a pretty bad trigger from the factory. I'm not always for the guy to put super high-end triggers in my guns. I used to be, and I thought that made a huge difference, but then I realized I just needed to become a better shooter. But I will say that 1022 does not have a great trigger from the factory. So you don't have to get a super light trigger, but I would advise you getting a crisper, better trigger and just a peep sight, just a Williams sight, or I really like the ones that are like the military sights. I forget who makes them, but I have a set of Williams on one of them, peep sights, and I have the good set of military style peep sights, M1A or M1 carbine style peep sights on my other, and they're great. And I'm not going to tell you not to scope it, because if it's primarily for hunting small game, you might want to scope on it. But I like just the iron sights. They're fast, they're rugged. You can shoot in the rain, you can shoot wet, you drop them in the mud, you spray them off, they're fine. So for that, and they're plenty accurate, you can definitely get out to, on very small targets to 100 yards or more if you practice and know your holdover. Mine actually has 2 aperture flip-up sights, one 0 for 50, 1 0 for 100, and it's remarkably accurate. So I would recommend those, because that's obviously what I do, and I'm not going to recommend you do something that I don't do. But if you're going to go with the scope, I would get a good low power variable or a straight fixed 2.5 or 4 power scope. If it's for all around, don't get the crazy high magnification, because then you give up a lot of close end stuff, and if it's going to be for defense, it's probably going to be in close. So I would advise that. And one of the great things about the 22, it's affordable. I know ammo is hard to get right now, guys, but even spend a little bit more for the 22 ammo, it's still going to be cheaper than centerfire ammo, and get out there and practice. And a man that's good with his gun in practice will make up for a lot, even a lot of power in the cartridge. Don't ever think that a Magnum cartridge is going to make up for poor marksmanship, because I don't care how powerful the cartridge is. If you miss, then it doesn't matter how powerful the cartridge is. You're better off with a hit with a weak cartridge than a miss with a super powerful cartridge. You're better off hitting with a 22 long rifle than missing with a 300 Winchester Magnum. And that's just a reality. And you're probably not going out and putting a ton of rounds to a 300 Winchester Magnum. So for all those reasons, for all those things, I'd say go with the 1022. My top pick would be the Ruger 1022 takedown if you want it, if you're going to be backpacking with it. Now realize that the takedown is nice for convenience and for carry and for hiking and stuff, but probably if you're looking for food, you're not going to have time, if you see an animal, to take it out of your pack and assemble it and load it and shoot it. Likewise with a gunfight. Gunfights in the real world, all the ones I know of, happen quickly. You're not going to have time to, you want to kill me, let me stop and assemble my gun and then get into a gunfight with you. Yeah, maybe you can run away and hide and then put your gun together, but the breakdown or the takedowns of AR-7s are not really great for that. But what they are great for is your main goal is to leave or bug out or something like that and leave the area, or hike and you have food, but something may happen, like you get lost, and which I've been lost in the woods, and then you need to get food. So they're good for that. So I would say it's 1022, the regular or the takedown. The AR-7 22 would also be an option. I would say if it's going to be all around, any 22s tend to be finicky with ammo. They can be very reliable, but generally they like one kind of ammo over another. I would advise you, if it's for all-around survival and shooting, I like copper-plated rounds. I don't like the straight lead rounds. I do shoot so much that I have literally plugged up barrels and caused rounds to shave off in the barrel and come out, in pieces. That's a real thing, and that generally happens a lot less. You can go a lot higher round count with copper-plated rounds. I would stay away from, I'm not going to mention brands to stay away from on this podcast, but some are better than others. I really like the CCIs. I really like their clean fire. They're polymer coated, and one of the reasons for that, I really like the CCI mini mags, but they're covered in wax, and I live in a very hot climate, and especially if they're going to stay in the car, when you take them out, all that wax and stuff has dripped off some, dripped on some. It's like not evenly coated, and it's never been an issue, but I just don't like that. The clean fire are polymer coated, and I like those. If it's for straight hunting, I like the CCI mini mag hollow points. They're great. Be advised on small game, hollow points, obviously they do work. They do expand out of a rifle. So you may want to favor those, but if you're going to eat the thing, like a small squirrel or a small rabbit or a small bird, the hollow points can really kind of tear them up. So you may even want to stay away from them and do less damage if that's your goal. And obviously, every time a projectile expands, it gets less penetration. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about what kind of ammo to use for the 22. But the CCI mini mags are kind of the standard, and they're great. I like the new Clean Fires. They're loaded about the same, but they have a polymer coating. So I'd say those are great too. But right now, ammo's hard to get. Just get it and run it in your gun and make sure that it runs. Like I said, any gun can be finicky with different kinds of ammo, even Glocks. Yes, even Glocks can malfunction, but especially 22s, and especially they might like one kind of ammo over another. Semi-autos, I found in general, tend to like high-velocity rounds, so keep that in mind. Real quick in closing, there are also things called the 22 short and the long, and there's also a 22 Calibri, which is very weakly loaded. It probably won't cycle in your semi-auto, but they can be very quiet in a rifle. So another thing you might want to think of for a survival situation where you're trying to evade and escape and be quiet, you can single load them even in a 1022. So you may look at the Calibris if you're trying to be super quiet. 22s are also easily suppressed. Obviously, obey all laws. So there's that. And in closing, guys, I hope you're never in an actual survival situation or a gunfight, but if you are, hopefully this knowledge helps you. Thanks, and have a blessed day. With this little break in between the original episodes, I want to say don't forget to go to goodshepherdtraining.com and become a patron. Today we're going to dig into part 3 of survival guns, the battle rifle. And there's a bunch of different names. The battle rifle, the main battle rifle, the assault rifle, the, I don't know, take your pick, the modern sporting rifle. But we all know what I'm talking about. A weapon of war. And most of you would probably think maybe that I would go there first for survival guns, but I'll tell you why I've waited till now. It is not my first pick. If you haven't listened to shotguns or 22s for survival, then you should go back and check those out, because it's all laid out there. But I'll give you why I did this in part 3, the battle rifle. And don't get me wrong, I think every American should own a rifle like this. For one, they're great for a lot of things, and I think just as an American, everybody should own one. Obviously, if you don't want to, you don't have to, but the quintessential assault rifle, battle rifle, is good for a lot of things, but I don't think it's the number one pick for survival. And here's why it's not my first choice. So there's a bunch of different calibers these come in. I also did a podcast called the AK versus the AR-15. You might want to listen to that to get some more nuanced. But the most common one in America today is the AR-15 in 223 Remington or 5.56 NATO. I know they're not exactly the same, but for the purposes of this podcast, they're similar enough. They were designed to cause pretty nasty wounds. They weren't designed to kill right away. They were designed to cause pretty nasty wounds, and they do that. But for survival, that might not be what you want. So I've done a lot of hunting. I've hunted everything from gray squirrels on the East Coast to prairie dogs on the West Coast, and big giant elk and wolf and bear and all manner of things. So I know a little bit about hunting, and I've hunted plenty with a 223. But 223 was originally designed as like a varmint cartridge. It's great for like coyotes and prairie dogs. But if you've ever shot anything in real life with it, you know that it gives some pretty horrific meat damage. And if I'm in a survival situation and I want to use that meat, I don't want that. I don't want to shoot a gray squirrel with a 223, because if my goal is to use the meat, I've kind of defeated that purpose. So it's kind of not a great round for that. And you might say, well, deer. And yes, you can take deer with 223. I've hunted with people that hunt with 223. Again, it's not my first choice. And like I said, it wasn't designed to give an immediate kill. That's not what that round was designed for. With some specialty ammo, with some better ammo, and ammo for that round has come a long way with like your 77 grain or your 60 something grain soft point. It can be a decent anchoring deer round. But here's the thing, if you have that rifle, you probably don't shoot it with that ammo all the time. And different ammo has to be zeroed. If you zero it with 55 grain Walmart ammo, you know, the quintessential like Winchester white box, which is decent ammo, or the Federal American Eagle 55 grain, you think you're going to go out and hunt a deer and shoot it with the 77 grain, different ammo doesn't shoot in the same place. So that's not going to work. So if you're going to have a dedicated deer gun, a dedicated deer ammo, then it's not a great choice for that. And unless you're going to run the 77 grain stuff all the time, which you're probably not because it's very expensive, it's not a great round for that. You might say, well, you just take and shoot the deer in the head, which I'm not saying I've never shot a deer in the head. I'm not going to say I have or haven't, but let's just say I've shot a lot of deer. And the thing about that makes an AR-15 or a battle-style rifle different is it's designed to hit a man-sized target, a chest-sized target, a big target. So the thing about a deer is if I want to shoot a deer in the head or right in the kill zone in the heart, I need it to stop right then or very close. Because if I shoot the deer and it dies a day later, that doesn't really do me any good, because if I'm in a survival situation, I've wasted an entire day and all those calories tracking it down, or I don't find it at all and buzzards get it, and I've just wasted ammo and time, and I've just killed an animal needlessly. So it's not great for that. They're designed to hit a big target, and they're very accurate, but here's the thing. There's something called height over bore. Without getting too nerdy about you, there's something called max ordnance, where the bullet never actually rises above the bore line, but it rises in relationship to the sights. And since the sights are so much higher, the bullet has to rise a lot and fall a lot, which if you're shooting a man-sized target from 50 meters to 300 meters is not a big deal. But if I'm trying to shoot something in the head, it's a very big deal. If you've ever done any CQB training with ARs, you know that you actually have to aim off the target at close distances to hit the target because it's got such a high height over bore. And that is really a problem if you're trying to shoot a deer in the head at different distances. Generally, if you're hunting in a survival situation, you're moving and you're not going to have time to... It's one thing if you're sitting on a stand and you know exactly what range something's at and you can use your laser rangefinder or whatever, but there's such a disparity between where the bullet hits and where the sights are on most combat rifles that judging that on the fly for a headshot on a deer, which is a pretty small target, what I'm saying is it's a tricky thing, and I don't think it's a good choice for that. So let's moving on. You get the same problem with the AK-47. Now the 7.62 by 39 is a great intermediate cartridge. I'd say better for all-around survival than the 223. It's got good ballistics. But again, if you're running that cheap Wolf or even worse, cheaper Tula ammo in it, the cheap Full Metal Jacket ammo, that's not a great hunting round for anything. And you're probably not running the more expensive stuff in it. And if you are and you switch back and forth, you're probably not taking a hammer and knocking the sights on your AK back and forth. So again, you get the same problem. The other issue is the same thing, height over bore. So it was designed to hit a man-sized target. And it does that. The AK is great for that, hit a man-sized target out to 300 yards quickly. That's what it was designed for. It was not, again, that height over bore is not an issue in a combat scenario, but it is an issue if you're trying to hit a small target at varying distances, especially close distances. So you got that issue going for you. Now hunting is only, part of what might come into survival. The other part is defense. Now, obviously those guns were built for combat, and they do that great. But if you're talking about a survival scenario, and like you heard my bio, I've been to war a few times. If you're envisioning like a battlefield scenario with multiple combatants, engaging various targets at various distances rapidly, then yeah, the battle rifle, the AR-15, the AK-47 is preeminent for that. That's why it's the number one and number two things on the battlefield that you're going to find, because it's the best for that. But is that the most realistic scenario for a survival situation and whatever you might face? And be honest, this is not Red Dawn, as awesome as the movie Red Dawn is. We're not running around, with Cubans parachuting out of the sky. That's probably not the scenario you're going to find yourself in. You've heard my bio, you've heard my thing, and I can count on both hands the number of gunfights I've been in my life. Okay, I cannot recall the amount of times that I've had to eat in my life, but it's certainly way, way more. I have to eat every day. And I don't have to eat every day. I've gone days without eating, but generally I need to eat every day, especially for long-term sustainability. I need to eat every day. So and neither one of those rifles does that great. So for those reasons, I would not make it first. Like I said, for the straight battlefield weapon, yeah, obviously that's why we use them on a battlefield, because they're the best for that. But is that the most likely survival scenario for you in your life, or what you think is going to happen? If everything gets crazy and there's some kind of collapse or partial collapse, even then, do you picture battlefields with, fields of Russians doing buddy rushes at you, or Cubans dropping out of the sky? Do you think that's the most realistic scenario? I would say probably not. Now, is the AR-15 AK-47 good for home defense? Good for somebody breaking in? Absolutely, it is. Absolutely, great for that. Nothing wrong with it at all. But also, a shotgun is as well, and a shotgun is better for hunting. So I would pick the shotgun as a better tool for the job. I'm very blessed to have a SCAR 17 hanging out in my living room. I have some very nice ARs, very reliable ARs. I have those things, and what is next? I have very blessed to have several STIs, which is one of those, a very high end, very nice competition/duty handgun that I use. I have more than one of those. I'm very blessed. But what stays next to my bed for when something happens at night? If something happens, an old beat up Remington 870 that I bought at a pawn shop for $150. Who knows how many years ago? Because it's the best tool for the job. If that is the best tool for the job. So just because something's fancier and black and tactical does not make it a better tool for the job. So for those reasons, I did not put it first on the list. You may disagree, that's fine. Leave comments, post about why the AR-15 is the greatest thing that was ever invented if you want. That's cool. I like the AR-15. You heard my job. I do it day to day, and the number one long rifle, we carry long rifles. The number one that I carry, I generally carry an AR-15. Sometimes I carry the SCAR 17, the SCAR Heavy, because mission dependent, it's a better tool for the job. But generally, mostly because of the weight, I carry a lightweight AR-15 day to day. Especially with today, with everything going on with civil unrest and rioting and everything like that. Good tool for the job. But for all-around survival, I would not put it high on the list. But they are so popular and are so prevalent that I put them number 3 on here. So let's talk about, like I said, I did a whole episode on the AR-15, AK-47. There's a lot of other battle rifles. I would say that a decent choice for a battle rifle, great for survival, would be the Mini 14/Mini 30. I'd say the Mini 30 would be better than the Mini 14. But either one, I did some police work where I was kind of a range master in charge of the armory, which was awesome. And I often preferred the Mini 14 over the AR-15. I know people will say that's heresy or whatever. The mag changes are slower, but generally that's not an issue in an actual gunfight. So I like the Mini 14. You get those advantages that you get with the battle rifle, most of the time, and you don't get that height over bore issue. It's kind of designed like a more classic hunting rifle. It's designed after the M1A, the M14, which in turn is designed after the M1 Garand, which has a more classic style. It points a little bit better, at least for me. It's a much more natural pointing gun. You don't have that height over bore issue, so it's easier to say hit a jackrabbit running at 35 yards than it is with an AR-15, because you have to calculate that in your head and decide how much far under the rabbit you're going to shoot, or how far over the rabbit you're going to shoot, in addition to how much you're going to lead it. It's just easier for that. And it doesn't look as scary, which you might think is and sometimes maybe it is a disadvantage. Sometimes maybe you want to look like nobody's better mess with me because I don't want any trouble. But sometimes you may kind of want to blend in more, and those Mini 14s, Mini 30s kind of look more like a classic rifle, which might not put as many people on edge, and they're just as effective. If you've never looked at a Mini 14, Mini 30, I'd give those a look. They're great guns. You got all kind of others. You got all the bullpup designs, and I've shot bullpups, and I'll be honest, I kind of like them. But I have so much time and experience in training running AR-15 and those kind of ergonomics. That's why I continue to run those. I just have so much practice and training on them. It's and not to be cliche, but it's kind of like an extension of my body. Like, I don't have to think about it. I know what the bolt sounds like when it runs on an empty chamber and it gets locked back. I don't even have to look. Like, I know it's out of ammo. I threw a new mag in it, and I spanked the side of it, and I'm ready to go again. It just happens, and I'm not going to fight all those years and all those thousands of rounds of training. I think the AK-47 is a great gun. I picked one up in Iraq when I was over there, mostly because I didn't have a ton of confidence in the M16s we had, because mine literally had a catastrophic malfunction. But I just have way more training in the AR-15. But in a survival scenario situation, the AK-47 is a great gun. It's got a great round. It's like the epitome of rugged reliability and being very forgiving of negligence. So I would say that's a great gun for all kinds of stuff. And on that line, I would say better for all-around survival is the SKS. Now, when I was a boy growing up in the rural South, we were pretty poor, and a lot of people around us were pretty poor. And I remember quite prolifically many people, myself and my friends included, hunting with SKS, because you could pick one up for $79, $120. Those days are gone. But an SKS is a remarkable design. It does all those things that the Mini 30 does. It's got that more classic design. It's not going to put anybody on edge like a scary black rifle, I'm being sarcastic, will. And it is good for hunting. Like I said, it's got those sights right above the bore, so you don't run into those issues trying to shoot small targets or trying to get in the kill zone of a deer. I think the sights are better. I wouldn't say they're better on like a modern urban environment than the AK-47, but I would say they're definitely much better for an all-around survival tool. I would say the sights on the SKS are far better. And you can even get some that have like flip-up, crude, like quick acquisition night sights, and there's all kinds of different designs of SKSs. So I would say the SKS is probably a better all-around survival gun than the AK-47. They're just as rugged, they're just as reliable. They have a very good piston system, which I'm not going to nerd out on you, but it's a very rugged, reliable system. It's a great gun. So I would say look at the SKS too. And next we'll talk about the full battle rifle, the full powered cartridge, which all the cartridges you talked to up till now, they're what's called an intermediate cartridge. They're halfway between a full power rifle cartridge and a pistol cartridge, which is great for a lot of things. But as I mentioned, I'm very blessed to have a SCAR 17, and it's a great gun. And sometimes that's my go-to long rifle for my work. If I'm doing Overwatch, if I'm doing a mission where I want one good anchoring round, vehicle rammings are a real-world threat in today's environment, especially for my job. So if I'm dealing with something where that might be an issue, that's a better tool for the job. If I'm doing something where I might have to shoot into let's just say if I want to stop something from happening with one shot right away, the 308, 760 by 51 NATO, or any similar full power battle cartridge is the best tool for that job. If I want a high volume of accurate, powerful fire, the full power battle rifle does that. Now I have both an M1A and a SCAR 17. I know people love the M1A. Like I said, I have one. It was my first competition. It was the first rifle I competed with. It was an M14 decommissioned military one, so it wasn't full auto or anything. It was just a decommissioned M14, but they're a great rifle. They're not a SCAR 17. You can, before all the gun craziness happened, you could get an M1A for $1,500 or less. SCAR 17 is going to cost you way more than that, the $4,000 or $5,000, maybe more right now. So you're talking a big disparity in price. So until you're good enough to take advantage of it, I wouldn't go crazy on that. But there's other ones too, but those are the big two. But a full power battle rifle is great, and it's great for a lot of things. Now that is great. The 308 is a great round for anchoring deer. It's a great all around hunting round for big game. It'll kill any big game in North America. And it's probably arguably the best for any big game in North America, or as good as anything else. So it's got that going for it. Aside from like a charging grizzly bear, it's probably one of the best cartridges all around for anything in North America. So it's great for that. The only issue is in a survival situation, and I've done a lot of deer hunting. I've taken more deer than I can remember. I'm very humbled and blessed to have been able to hunt all over, and the 308 does it great. The 308 is a great round. It anchors large animals. Unlike the 223 that's designed to wound, it is designed to stop. a living thing quickly. And you want that for hunting if you want to find it, need it. But in a survival situation, any deer hunter will tell you, hunting large game is not an all the time, everyday thing. And if I'm on the move, deer are hard to shoot if I'm got a bunch of crap on me and I'm trying to hike from one place to another, which is very likely in a survival scenario. And if I do happen upon a deer and I get a good shot and I take a deer and I'm trying to move from one place to another, now I have, 80, 120 pounds of meat depending on where I am in the country and how big the deer are, mule deer or white-tailed deer or even something bigger. And if I'm trying to move from one place to another, I'm kind of wasting a bunch of meat because I probably have a bunch of crap on me and I probably don't want to add more weight on me because there's a limit to how much weight you can carry. Carrying rucking with a lot of weight, packing a lot of weight sucks. So how much meat am I going to carry with me and how am I going to preserve it until it goes bad? So I've just shot a bunch of meat in a survival scenario, maybe not the best thing to do if I'm moving around. If I'm at a cabin or something, then I guess it doesn't matter. But if we're talking about moving from one place to another, I probably already have as much stuff as I can reasonably carry, and I probably need it or I wouldn't be carrying it. So it's good for that, but I wouldn't put it as number one. The other thing is they're heavy. My Scar Heavy, which is one of the reasons I bought it, it's one of the lightest, even though it's called Scar Heavy because it's more powerful. It's one of the lightest full power battle rifles. It comes at 7.7 pounds, which is pretty reasonable. But it is fairly heavy compared to an AR, and the ammo is heavier. And my M1A, a full size M1A M14 style rifle is gonna weigh almost 12 pounds. It weighs like 11 pounds and change. It's a freaking heavy rifle, especially when you can get a decent AR. The M16A1 weighed like 6 pounds. You're talking double the weight. And weight's a real thing. If I was talking about a battle rifle for a real survival situation, if I had to pick a battle rifle, which again would not be my first choice, I would pick my Scar 17. I would pick a Scar 17, and that might be an option, might not be an option for you. I'm very blessed I saved up and sold a lot of guns to get that Scar 17. It was an expensive gun. I'm very blessed to have it. But that might be out of your reach. But I would take a full power battle rifle over anything else, because if I'm in an actual situation, in a survival situation, and I need to survive, I like that heavier round. I like that 308. What if I'm trying to stop a vehicle, like I alluded to earlier? 308 is better for that. If I am trying to take a big game animal, 308 anchors better. If I'm in a fight, I want that fight to be ended quickly. It's not a battlefield where if I injure somebody, medics are going to come take them away, and wounding somebody is just as good as killing somebody. If I'm against some radical whatever ideology group and their entire goal is to kill as many people as they can before they die, I want to stop them from doing bad things right now. And if I wound them and they can still continue, that's not really great for me. So the 223 is not as desirable for that as a 308. So for me, if you're talking about a battle rifle for a survival situation, I would get a full power battle rifle, whether that's an M1A, an M14 style, whether that's a Scar, whether it's I didn't talk about the AR-10, which is basically, it was actually originally a 308 rifle that the military wanted in 223, but they make what you would call an M16 AR-15 style rifle in 308. It's the original version, the AR-10. And those are great. They're not super heavy. They do require a little bit more maintenance, but they're a great choice. They're not super heavy, and I would say that would be a better choice for me for all-around survival than an AR-15, and it's got the same ergonomics if you're used to it. Don't underestimate the older stuff like the M1 Grand. Wouldn't be my first choice, but it wouldn't be my last choice either. It's a full-power cartridge. It's a great hunting cartridge. It's got great sights. It might only hold 8 rounds or whatever, but in real world, unless you're a psychopath, you're not going out and trying to kill a bunch of people, which I hope nobody listening to this is that person. If you have to get in a defensive gunfight where you're protecting yourself, generally those are settled in less than 8 rounds, less than 10 rounds. And you should be able to own whatever size magazine you want. I don't believe in any prohibition on that, but But in general, if you can't get it done with 5, 10 rounds, you probably can't get it done with 20 or 30. You should probably worry about hitting your target. So I wouldn't give it a big disadvantage for that. So I would say for all-around survival, the battle rifle, if I was going to go with it, I would go for a full power cartridge. I would give up carrying a few less rounds for having that more power for all kinds of reasons. Barrier penetration, stopping vehicles that are trying to ram people, for taking large game, for stopping a fight right away. For those reasons, I would pick that. Whatever your pick is, let me know. Let me know. I'm sure there's a ton of people that are going to disagree and say the AK-47, the AR-15 is the only way to go for all-around survival weapon. I'm just telling you why I didn't pick it first, but I think that everybody should own one. Hopefully you're not in the scenario where you only have to have one rifle. That would be a sad day when if I could only have one long gun and maybe 1 or 2 handguns. That's not the scenario I want to be in. I think everybody should own one. They're a lot of fun to shoot. Especially AR-15s are great for training new shooters. They don't have a lot of recoil. They're very forgiving. They're a lot of fun, and until recently they were very affordable for what you got for the money. Just economy of scale. There were so many made and so many companies making them that you could get such a good gun for such a low price. Oh man, I think about right before this whole crunch happened, I already had a lower receiver, but I pretty much bought everything else in a kit, the entire gun, for under $300. I don't remember if it was $300, like $299 or like $399. Anyway, great rifle, the entire thing except the lower receiver. Obviously, I put an optic on it, but nowadays you're looking at who knows how much for a decent, AR-15 style rifle. Let's hope that the guns and ammo come back in price soon, so every American has one. And if you don't, like I said, I think every American should. I haven't bought any guns recently. I mentioned last night that I'm glad because I have enough. Obviously you always want more, but I have enough guns. If you don't have a good survival battery in a few of these different guns, or if you don't have any gun at all, I would encourage you even now to go get something. It's now's not the time to be unarmed. There's a lot of stuff going on, and hopefully you never need it. I hope to never need one again for anything other than training and doing my job and hunting, obviously, and just the joy of shooting. But if you need one and you don't have one, there's really no substitute. So get out there. Thanks for listening to Gunfighter Life. Go out and train. The training and the practice is more important than the tool. So as always, go out there, be good men and women. Train often. Don't ever let anything compromise your morals and being a good Christian man. And thanks for listening to Gunfighter Life. With this little break in between the original episodes, I want to say don't forget to go to goodshepherdtraining.com and become a patron. Hello, welcome back to Gunfighter Life. As always, I am your host, Michael Melito, a very blessed man. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I make no apologies for that. It's first and foremost in my life and everything that I do. God is number one. I fall somewhere after that. So you don't have to be a Christian to listen to the podcast, but know that that's part of my life and everything that I do, and this podcast is no different. Allow me to make a way in this world with just a Bible and a gun and a simple man, and that's all I really need. So if you're listening to this anytime soon, when it comes out, the crazy times we're in right now with the global pandemic and riots and everything going on. I do another podcast. It's called the Alpha Male Podcast. I just did another episode on what's available right now in guns and ammo you can get right now. So if you're interested in that, go give that a listen. Right now, this is going to be the next sequential part of survival guns, doing a series on survival guns. We did shotguns, 22, and the battle rifle all in different episodes. So if you haven't given those a chance, go back and give those a listen. This is going to be handguns for survival. This is what we're going to talk about, handguns. So, why do handguns exist? Handguns do not exist because they are more accurate, because they are more powerful, because they are more effective. Handguns are a thing because you can have them with you all the time and they don't weigh a lot. They're very maneuverable and they're very concealable. That's why handguns are a thing. Obviously, you can't walk around with a ton of guns. You generally one long gun and a handgun. I love handguns. I've done most of my competition shooting with a handgun. I've won most of my competitions. Most of the things that I've won have been with a handgun. I love the handgun, but a handgun is a harder tool to master. It's inherently less effective. It's less effective at stopping fights than a long gun, either a rifle or a shotgun. So we use the handgun not because it's the best tool. If you said that I had to get in a gunfight today, first of all, I would try to avoid being in that place in that time. But if I had to, and I had to pick a tool, I would pick the rifle or the shotgun depending on the circumstances. The handgun is a tool. Why cops carry it? Because they can have it with them all the time. It's kind of hard to do other tasks with a long gun if that's not your primary job is gunfighting. Now, I do carry a long gun as part of my job, but I also always have a handgun on me and I practice with it all the time because it's a tool that I can have with me all the time. It's also a tool that I can conceal. Unless we're talking some ridiculous scenario or some kind of thing where I'm having it in a vehicle or something, it's pretty hard to conceal a long gun. So that's why we have handguns in the first place. Handguns require dedication. You could be pretty proficient with a rifle and practice a couple of times a year and stay pretty proficient, but a handgun requires a lot more practice. I tell my men, and I try to every day, unless there's some crazy exception, to dry fire 15 minutes a day every day and to go out and try and shoot at least once a week, hopefully more. So to stay fairly proficient and stay on your game, that's like a minimum. And you can go longer without shooting live fire, but you need to dry fire all the time with a handgun to stay proficient. It's a skill that needs to be practiced. So let's talk about you got your big 3, your 9, your 40, and your 45 for caliber. And now I switched to 9 when I was a cop, long before it was a trend. I'm talking a decade ago or more. I switched to 9. I can't remember exactly the year, but I switched long before it was a trend, when everybody was going crazy for the 40. And I did that because I actually shot different. I started competition shooting like action pistol, and I started shooting guns on the clock, and I saw how much faster the 9mm was and how much more affordable it was. Even when I reloaded, I started off competing with the 45, and I realized even reloading, I could just practice and shoot much more with the 9mm. And while you could argue the 40 or the 45 is a little bit more effective, what's really effective is hitting your target. And if you practice more, you'll be more effective. That's just the reality. And if I can, unless I have a blue sky budget and somebody, even I don't have a blue sky budget to get all the practice that I want and all the ammo that I want. So if I can practice more with a 9mm, I would give up a little bit of that power and a little bit of the millimeters for being able to train more and practice more. So I settled on the 9mm long before it was a new hot thing that the FBI went back to, because they realized the same thing. And so I would say, unless there's a good reason, like you already have one or you get a sweet deal on a police trade-in, the 9mm really is it if you want a good all-around defensive gun. The 9mm is it. I love 45. I've got a very nice Colt Combat Elite 45, super accurate, great gun. But it's not my go-to every day. I dry fire with it a lot because I have it and it's got a great trigger. Very heavy, but very, very good trigger. So it's good for practice, but it's not my go-to carry all the time gun. It's not even my go-to concealed carry gun. The vast majority of my handguns for defensive use or for work use are 9mm, and there's a reason for that. I prefer 147 grain 9mm. I prefer Spirit Gold Dots. I prefer either Spirit Gold Dot 147s or Ranger T 147s. That's just me. I'm a ballistics nerd. I like the heavier 9mm high sectional density bullets. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. Especially right now, you're going to have to get what you can get. I would say the reason I like the Spirit Gold Dots and the Winchesters is they both make loads with the Train and Defend and the Winchester, and the Spear Gold Dot and Spear Lawman, where the training rounds and the duty rounds shoot in the same place. The does you no good or very little good to do a bunch of practice with one 15 grain and then you shoot 147 for defensive loads or 124, because they almost certainly will not shoot in the same place. So you're conditioning yourself to shoot a different place than what you need to shoot. May that be an issue or may it not be an issue? I don't really know, but it might be an issue, so I'm going to do what I can to mitigate that. If I'm just, doing a close quarters contact shot at 2 yards, is it going to matter? No, it's not going to matter. But if I do have to make a more precision shot, it will matter. So why would I waste that money, even if it's cheaper ammo, if it's shooting in a different place? So that'd be my little advice on ammo. Right now, like I say, take what you can get, take what you can find. Obviously, the military uses ball because they do for policy reasons, but you should never choose for defensive use. You should never choose ball rounds if you can get, or if your location allows you to have, expanding ammo, expanding hollow point ammo, whatever you want to call it. Get a good proven track record round. Don't go with the whiz bang round. Don't go with the next hot thing that's a super light bullet at super high velocity, or the next crazy thing that comes out with some crazy name. Get something with a good proven track record. Another round that I really like, that I used for years in law enforcement, I don't use it anymore, but it's the 9BPLE. It's been used by law enforcement for decades, at least 10 years, because I've been using it that long, and I had boxes from 1996. So 9BPLE made by Federal. It's a great round. Generally, it's pretty available and pretty inexpensive as far as duty ammunition goes. I'd look at that. But just get something with a good, solid track record. When we're talking about guns, I own a Glock. When I go to training courses and stuff, I will sometimes run a Glock because most of my guys run a Glock. I'm not the biggest fan of Glock. They work. They're cheap. If you want a gun that's general purpose for the general purpose cop, and you're not going to be a specialist and you just want a simple, effective gun that works, the Glock is probably it. If you're talking about an all-around defensive handgun for survival, I would say the Glock is not a bad choice. I would say as reliable and as good and made in America is a Smith & Wesson M&P. I've won most of my competitions with a Smith & Wesson M&P, so I would really give the M&P a look. I've never found them to be any less reliable than a Glock. I know Glock people will say that's heresy, but I'm just giving you my experience. I like an M&P. I find them much more ergonomic, and I don't think you're giving anything up. So if you want something made in America and you like the rugged reliability of a Glock, I would say look at the M&P. And there's a ton of different options out there. My go-to for work and my go-to is an STI. That's a pretty expensive gun, but my life depends on it, and I'm not going to go for the bargain brand when my life depends on it or somebody else's life depends on it. I run an STI. I like the STI. I also really like Berettas. I don't run one at work because I'd have to run it with the hammer down, which I don't want to do. I can run the STI with the hammer back, but you should look into the striker fires are the hot thing right now. But I really like a hammered gun. They have a much better trigger in general. I would really look at your hammered guns. You can look up single action only or double single action or double action only. You can look those up, and you can look up striker fire and see the difference. It's better for you to look that up and just look at a picture of it to understand it than it is for me to try and explain it on an audio podcast. But look those up. Look up the differences between those. And I would say get out and try some. Don't just pick a Glock because everybody runs a Glock, because that doesn't make it the best because everybody does it. Everybody does a lot of things that aren't good. Nothing wrong with a Glock. I would just say do your own research and do your own things on that. Other handguns for survival, revolver. So I carry an STI all the time for work, but I'm not concealed carrying a full-size STI most of the time because it's a big gun. So my concealed carry gun usually, or my backup gun, is a Smith & Wesson J-frame. The first handgun I ever bought, and I still use and I still carry all the time, is a Smith & Wesson J-frame. I have two. One's a 38 Special Plus P. One's a 357 Magnum that I generally mostly carry 38 Specials in because I can get faster follow-up shots. But a little the revolver is a great choice for survival. I would say you may have a better chance of finding ammo for those right now, but a good concealed carry gun, good revolvers have a lot of advantages. You can make contact shots, meaning with a semi-automatic, if you press the muzzle up against the target, you can put it out of battery and the gun won't fire. With a revolver, you can shove the muzzle right up into what you're shooting and it will still fire. That's a big advantage, especially in CQB, especially in close quarters stuff. Another big advantage of those is there's no magazine to lose. So if you go hiking or something like that, covering a lot of ground, I have had before where I've inadvertently hit a magazine release and then you drop your magazine and then you're out all that ammo. You can't do that with the revolver. Revolvers obviously are inherently limited, anywhere between 5 and 8 rounds. There might be some out there that hold more, like a 22 that holds 10 rounds, but generally between 5 and 8 rounds is your capacity on a revolver. Most gunfights take less rounds than that. I say most. So that is an inherent disadvantage, but generally doesn't come into play. Also, with a revolver, a big advantage, especially if we're talking about all-around survival guns, is with a semi-auto, you have to have a pretty uniform, there's like plus P ammo, but it's a pretty narrow margin, because if you don't have enough power, the slide won't cycle properly, and if you have too much power, you have the potential for breaking the gun. So you have a very limited range. With a revolver, since you're manually rotating and putting new ammunition in the gun, then you can shoot very, very mild ammo and very, very hot ammo if the gun will handle it without any reliability issues. So if you're talking about taking game or something like that, that's kind of an advantage. You can load it way, way down or way, way hot. So, a general mid-size revolver in 357, 38 special, or 44 special, 44 Magnum would be a good choice for kind of an all-around gun, an all-around handgun. So you've got that advantage. People say they're more reliable. I don't agree with that. You can get very reliable semi-autos, probably as reliable. And the thing about revolvers, if they have a problem, generally it's a big problem. And revolvers do have problems. Revolvers do jam. They do malfunction. Generally, people that say that don't shoot them a ton, and they don't shoot a ton. If you shoot a revolver enough, it will go out of time. It will jam. It can malfunction, just like anything else. So I would say they're more forgiving of neglect than a lot of semi-autos. So they have that going for them. One of the big tips I'll also give on handguns is don't trust your life to anything that's not proven, whether that's ammo or the handgun. Don't buy the next hot handgun that comes out, because no matter how good the manufacturer is, no matter what, generally it happens a lot. I wouldn't say most, but it happens fairly frequently that a new handgun will have issues. You don't want to, if this is gunfighter life, this is not go out and plinking. This is not plinking podcast. This is gunfighter life. If you're going to be training for a gunfight, or hopefully you don't get in a gunfight, but if you are, you don't want to trust your life to something unproven. Don't go out and get the new whiz-bang thing on the cover of a magazine. My general rule and what I tell my guys is if it hasn't been around at least 3 years, don't trust your life to it. If it's going to malfunction and have issues, let somebody else find that out. You don't need to be finding that out. You're a professional gunfighter, or you're a defensive gunfighter, whatever your thing is. You don't want to find out that gun has a recall or an issue, if that's the gun you're trusting your life to. Let somebody else figure that out. Give it a couple of years. If there's any kinks, somebody will find out and will figure it out. It happens with revolvers. It happens with semi-autos. It happens with the big name brands. It happens with new brands. It happens with whatever. So if a new model or a new something comes out, don't trust your life to it. I don't care how good the advertisement is. Get something that's been around a while and that's proven. There's been no radical new changes in handguns lately. There's a couple of little refinements here or there, but much more important that gun is reliable. You need to make sure that gun is reliable. You need to make sure it's reliable for you with the ammunition that you use. I've had handguns that were generally very reliable. The brands were very reliable, and I've had ammunition that was like top notch, but for whatever reason, that gun would not function correctly with that ammo, even though they were both very good quality, high name brands. Don't just assume. Don't trust your life to anything unproven. Don't get a box of the next whiz-bang duty rounds that have a great reputation. It might be great rounds, but you don't run them through your gun because they're too expensive or whatever. Don't just assume that it's going to work because it's a good brand and a good brand of ammo. You have to know, and you have to know where that handgun's going to shoot, and you have to train with it. So that's what I would say for handguns for survival. I would say hunting. I didn't mention the hunting in my bio. Normally I do, but I've hunted everything from gray squirrels on the East Coast to prairie dogs on the West Coast, and elk and deer and wolves and bear. And I've been very blessed to do a lot of handgun hunting. I've taken a lot more. I would say that I've taken more deer with a handgun than a lot of people have ever taken deer. I've taken a lot of deer with a handgun, but you don't hunt with a handgun because it's generally the best tool for the job. In fact, I can't think of a situation where it'd ever be better than a rifle or a shotgun. You do it because you want the challenge, or because you find yourself in a situation where you have a handgun and you want to take a deer and you can make the shot. But you would never, like if my goal was to put meat on the table and I could choose between rifle, pistol, shotgun, handgun, I would never take a handgun. You do it because it's what you have on you, or you do it because you want the challenge. So, can you hunt with a handgun? Yes, I've absolutely taken several animals with handguns, including many deer, but not because it was easier. So for a survival situation, can you hunt with a handgun? Yes. If you're looking for an all-around handgun that'll do both, I would say look at either 357 Magnum or 44 Magnum or 10 millimeter. They're probably your best all-around. If you wanted things that would do both. They're not the best at defense and hunting, but they're a good middle ground, so I'd look at that. Next thing I'll talk about is the 22 handgun, and I really like 22 handguns because up until recently, it's fairly affordable to shoot. You've heard my background. You've heard what I do, and I carry an STI 9mm 1911 day to day. I have Glocks. I have all kinds of. I'm very blessed to have very nice guns. But most of my live fire training I do with a 22. Because if I'm practicing the fundamentals, which is the backbone, it should be the backbone of all your practice, I can do all that with a 22. If I'm practicing my draw, I can do that with a 22. If I'm practicing my reloads or things like that, I can do it with a 22. I can do it cheaper, and I can do it more. Like I said, unless you have an unlimited budget, you could buy a lot more up until recently, because it's hard to get any ammo right now. But in normal times, you can get a lot more 22 for $100 than you can get 9mm. And I would rather get the more practice in. And every once in a while, go back and confirm and make sure that, like I would set up my 22 to shoot in the same place, same point of aim, point of impact as my 9mm or my whatever my go-to gun was. But all the fundamentals are the same. All the fundamentals of training are the same. 22s are great for training. 22s will work for defense. They are obviously not a first choice for defensive gun use, but enough people have been stopped in what they were doing by a 22 to know that they're not ineffective. Are they the most effective? No, but the handgun is already a trade-off. So the 22 could be pressed into a defensive role if you absolutely had to do it. Obviously, hunting small game with a 22 is great. 22, especially if you're talking about survival. So I've done a lot of hunting, and in a real crap at the fan scenario, you're probably more likely to encounter small game, especially if you're trying to move from one location to another to feed yourself. Small game is probably more likely than large game, and like I said, a handgun is not the first choice for hunting, but it's what you happen to have on you, and you have a 22 on you, and you can take that small game. Then that's definitely a viable option. So I would say the 22 handgun would be a viable choice for a survival handgun. And it should be a backup tool anyway. So if it's a backup tool and a backup tool that allows you to take small game, that's great. The 22s, also you have a great choice for all-around handgun for learning skill and practicing and being able to conceal it. And all-around use and small game hunting would be the different 22 revolvers. 22 double actions are great, but kind of spendy. You can get you used to be able to get Heritage Rough Riders, which are 22s. You could get the 22 revolver and 22 Magnum interchangeable cylinders for less than $200, which is crazy cheap for a handgun. I had one. I did a lot of training with it when I used to teach kids how to shoot. I would teach them on that, and it was a great gun, great handgun to learn on, great 22 handgun to learn on. I would be a great cost-effective gun to learn on. Ruger makes one called the Single 6. They make some other different models, but basically the same thing for a little bit more money. A great all-around choice. Very, very proven design. Very classic design. I really like for 22 semi-autos, you're talking about dependability and accuracy. You're looking at your Ruger Mark 1, 2, 3, or 4. Take your pick. They're all great. I've owned a bunch of them. I own one now that's great. I do a lot of practicing with it. I was out practicing with it earlier. It's a great gun. Also, they make a lot of replicas. If you have a common handgun, like we're talking about Glocks or MPs, they make those in 22. So if you want something effective to train with for survival, for gunfighting, I would say that those would be a good option, because you can get one in 22, get one in 9mm. Then you've got a backup. You can use the same holster. You can do the same drills. You can do the same draw practice, all that stuff. So I would say definitely give those a look for all-around survival. I would say, obviously, for survival, the handgun is a tool you can have with you all the time. You might find an environment where you can't be openly armed, so the handgun might be the only tool that you have. So we're talking about survival here. So make sure, like I said, that handgun is an art. You have to practice it. Some people are naturally better than others, but you have to practice the handgun. It takes skill and mastery. It's an art and a science. You really have to kind of put the time and dedication into that handgun. So I would encourage you to do that. If you find yourself in a situation where all you have on you is a handgun, you want to have confidence in it and be good with it, and that requires practice and dedication. So more important than anything else with a handgun, get out and practice and train. You don't become a gunfighter by accident. You become a gunfighter. It's a discipline. It's a I guess we used to say a lifestyle. So get out and train. Get a good quality handgun. But everybody gets, like, I don't even know. Handguns have so much like bravado around them about this gun's better than that gun and this caliber and that caliber. Get out and train and be able to hit your target and have a good, reliable handgun, and practice. That's it, guys. Thanks, and have a blessed day. With this little break in between the original episodes, I want to say don't forget to go to goodshepherdtraining.com and become a patron. Today we're going to continue on with the long guns. We're going to talk about lever action rifles. Now, lever action rifles obviously are a quintessential American gun. Probably, arguably, down from the pump, the fastest manually operated, or one of the fastest manually operated guns. And you might think they're a little outdated and antiquated, and in some cases they are. I would never advise somebody going on a battlefield with a lever action versus, A.K.s and A.R.s. But that's probably not the most likely survival scenario you'll be faced with. Like I said, I've been on combat tours. I've fought wars, unfortunately, and I hope that you guys never have to face that. And if you have, congratulations for making it through it. But more likely is you're going to have to feed yourself, and you may have to defend yourself against one or two or maybe more people. So that's a more realistic survival scenario. And the lever action has been doing that for a long time. Since, I don't know, but the most popular models are like the 1860s, 1870s, 80s, and 90s. So they've been around at least that long, and they have been putting food on the table and putting people in the dirt, as they say, for that long. So nobody could argue that they're not effective for that. Are they maybe the most effective? No. But there are some reasons why you may want one. They definitely require less maintenance than your AR-15 does. Probably a little bit more than your AK, but probably less than your AR. So less maintenance in the most popular rifles, the AR. Also, you may live in a state where the right of self-defense and the right of owning whatever gun is most effective has been taken away from you. So for that reason, you may choose a lever action. So if you have to choose a manually operated gun or a gun without a detachable magazine or whatever other ridiculous restrictions, the lever action might rise to the top. Or if you listen to this from another country where your rights have been stripped from you, the lever action may be your best choice. So like I know in Australia, I think you can have a lever action. I'm not sure. I believe that's still the case, is you could have a lever action where you can't have like a semi-automatic, AR-15 or SCAR 17 or whatever. So for that reason, you might choose it. So the lever action has a couple of strengths. Like I said, it's manually operated, and a big survival strength of that is you can fire ammunition that's loaded very, very hot for caliber and very, very low for caliber. With something like a semi-auto pistol or a semi-auto AR, yeah, you can run, 36 grains all the way up to 77 grains or 80 grains, but you have to basically have you have a very narrow range of what will actually cycle that rifle reliably. Same way with the semi-auto pistol, you got 9mm from 115 grain generally. There are some outliers all the way up to 147 grain, but you have to have basically a pretty set power level to cycle that slide reliably and not break the gun. You don't have that with a lever action or with a revolver, which I'll get to revolvers probably in another episode if I get to them. But because you manually operate the mechanism, you can get a lever action, and let's say a 357 Magnum, that'll shoot a 357 Magnum and a 38 Special, which for survival scenario, obviously being able to shoot more than one caliber is a good thing. So that's one of its strengths. And you can shoot, especially if you reload, what they call a cowboy load, which is like you can load a very heavy for caliber 38 Special moving at very moderate velocities, and you could shoot something like a duck or a squirrel and not blow it to pieces. Whereas if you shot one with an AR, you could shoot one with an AR, but it's designed to cause pretty nasty wounds, which you don't want if you're trying to eat a squirrel or trying to harvest a rabbit or whatever, or a duck or a grouse or any number of smaller creatures, which is probably more likely in a survival scenario than being on a battlefield, because I could count the amount of gunfights I've been in on both hands and have fingers left over, and you've heard my background, but I've had to feed myself I've eaten almost every day of my life. So do the math on that. That's more likely. And I can load down that 38 Special with a very heavy round. Same thing with a 44 Special, 44 Magnum. I can load that down with a very heavy for caliber bullet and a 44 Special and take small game, or 38 Special and take small game and not blow it to pieces like I will with an AR. So you've got that going for you. Also, those loads are very quiet in a lever action, and you don't need any kind of suppressor or any special license or stamp or anything. So you've got that going for you. They're very forgiving to reload. So those pistol rounds in the lever actions are very forgiving to reload. They're very easy straight wall cartridges to reload, so you got that going for you. I do reload. I didn't mention that in the bio, but if you are reloading, there are some of the easiest rounds to reload for. Lots of different powders. You can even make them into black powder cartridges. You can load them with black powder. You can make your own primers. I'm not going to get into how to do that, but you could do that if you needed to, and it would still function, and it's not as sensitive as, say, like the AR is for different powder types and things like that. So you've got that going for you. You can also load them very hot. You can get a 44 Magnum is a great medium to large game round. It is great for that. 44 Magnum is a hammer out to 100, 150 yards. It is great for that. And most shots, people like to tout about, like the 6.5 Creedmoor is great to 1,000 yards, but most people will never shoot out to 1,000 yards. So I wouldn't even worry about that. Most hunting shots are within 100 yards. I've taken animals farther than that, especially out west, but most people, especially east of the Mississippi, 100 yards is more than you're probably ever going to need. So their deer hammers, the 357 is obviously less powerful than the 44 Magnum, but it is still a deer hammer. It still kills deer. It still puts deer in the dirt. It's great for that, especially out with like a soft point 158 grain load out of your lever action rifle. They're great for that. Also, they're great and handy. That's why a lot of people still hunt with them. Even though they can hunt with a semi-auto, they still hunt with a lever action because it does have a fast follow-up shot. Your split times aren't going to be as fast, but in the real world, when you're shooting something, any kind of practical scenario, unless they're right up close in your face, you have to shoot and then acquire a sight picture and shoot again. So that takes time. And in that time, you could also be manually operating that gun to get your second shot ready. So on practical purposes, especially in hunting, it's very rare that you would be at a disadvantage with a lever action over a semi-auto if you are proficient with it. And like I said, you can load those rounds very hot. So you've got that going for you. You can go from very mild to, from mild to wild, as they say. You can go from very, very mild rounds to very hot rounds. And you can do all kinds of things. Also great for new shooters or smaller shooters or young shooters. You load those weaker rounds, as we said, you load those and get them used to shooting those and be very proficient. I'd rather somebody hit a target with a weaker round than miss a target with a high-powered round. So they're great for that. Also, some of the classic hunting cartridges. So in a full-blown, we're talking end-of-the-world scenario, the road, whatever, your more common rounds would be better. I would guess like the 223, the 308, the 9mm, because they are more prevalent. But in a partial collapse like we're having right now in the United States, and boy, that's weird to say, but it really is. If you try to get ammo or guns right now, it's kind of a partial collapse scenario. If you look at all the civil unrest, as weird as that is to say, we're kind of in a partial collapse right now. And in the partial collapse, those maybe more off the beat, I want to say less common rounds are actually easier to get, because right now everybody's going crazy for 9mm and 223 and 308. Those rounds are all really hard to get. But something like a 44 Special is not as hard to get. So you could still get ammo and still go out and practice and not have to worry about dipping into your reserve, because you could go to whatever big box store and pick up ammo for 44 Special or something like that. Or another classic, if we're talking about, I think if you're going all around survival, your pistol caliber, 45 long, Colt's another great one, 44 Magnum, 357 Magnum are your best all around. But if you wanted a good rifle caliber, if you were leaning more towards the longer range, more powerful, the 30-30 is still around that you can get, and the 30-30 is a great all-around hunting defense round. When the 30-30 came out in the 1800s, it was like revolutionary how great that round was. And deer are not taking steroids. You can kill them with a just because they have 6.5 Creedmoors and 338 Winchester Magnums does not mean that you need those to kill a deer. Trust me. I've killed plenty of deer with much weaker rounds than the 30-30. The 30-30 is a great round for everything up to and including elk. The 30-30 is a great round, and it's a great defense round. And you can still get 30-30. So I would say in a partial collapse like we have now, those other weird rounds are great. Also, the 35 Remington. You can get Marlin's, a bunch of other guns too, but Marlin's the one that still makes them that I know of, and 35 Remington is, ballistically, picture like a 357 Magnum on steroids. It's very powerful. It's a very large diameter rifle round. It's great, especially in thick. It is like the quintessential brush gun. So if you don't know a brush gun, and I'm talking about like hunting in thick, dense cover woods, briars, like you would find on the east, the very far east coast in the south, or the very far west coast, or up in New England, or if you're a foreigner in like perhaps Finland, where I've never been there, but I understand they have very thick, dense forests. Any of the Scandinavian states, so. Anywhere where like scrub oaks, very dense cover where you're not going to get a very long shot, but you might get a close-in running shot. 35 Remington is great, and that's another round you can still probably get right now. I haven't looked for it because I don't own one, but it's a great round. I did my first bear hunt back east when I was a boy with 35 Remington. So 35 Remington is a great round. Another one. So you have that going for you. So in a partial collapse, you may still get it. And if they do start banning guns, which I hope they don't, they'll probably be some of the less banned guns, because they're just quintessential American, your cowboy gun. Another advantage, even if they don't ban them, if you have to walk down the street with a long gun, sometimes you might want to look like, hey, don't mess with me, but sometimes you may want to look inconspicuous. And a 30-30 lever action, or any lever action for that matter, with a wood stock can still do plenty of damage, but it looks way less scary than, let's say, an AR-15. And round for round, it's more powerful. So you've got that going for you. And I think those are some of the reasons why you might not want to overlook the lever action. I don't want to go long-winded. We'll keep this a short episode. Like I said, I don't think that will be your first or second choice. But if that's what you have, and if your main goal is, let's say hunting, and it may have to be used for defense, I would say that, or if you live in a restricted environment, I would say that the lever action is a great choice for survival. That's it, guys. Thanks, and have a blessed day. With this little break in between the original episodes, I want to say don't forget to go to goodshepherdtraining.com and become a patron. Alright, gunfighters, let's get into a new topic. One that I don't hear talked about a lot. I hear a lot of 22 for survival, shotgun for survival, and for good reason. They're good choices. Hear about what's the best battle rifle for the end of the world as we know it, man. When the zombie hordes come, which battle rifle is it? The AR, the AK? Hear a lot of that stuff, and that's all cool. But I want to bring you something a little bit different today. If you listen to the podcast prior, you'll know that we talk about all manner of guns for survival. And I think most guns boil down to survival, whether it's defending yourself from people, survival, or putting food on the table to feed yourself, survival. Even most of the competitions we shoot, whether it's 3-gun, they derive from a martial application, or sporting clays, they're derived from a hunting application. So even guns specialized for those have their origins in survival. And I don't shy away from the term of being a survivalist or survival guns. I embrace it. I'm to have dominion over the beasts. I don't apologize for killing animals and putting them on the table and eating them. I don't apologize for defending myself and my family. So let's continue on today and talk about survival guns that I haven't heard talked about. Really, I don't know that I've ever heard a whole episode on this. So, black powder for survival. Now, what I'm not saying is to get rid of your AR, your AK, and your shotgun and to go out and buy a brown Bess or a blunderbuss, and that's all you need for the apocalypse. That's not what I'm saying at all. I don't know how things will shake out. I don't know what the future holds. Only God knows what the future holds. But imagine a world where things get really bad. I'm not talking about $10 a gallon gasoline or $20 a gallon gasoline, which I could easily see in the near future. I'm talking about a world where you can't get gasoline. I'm not talking about a world where politicians are trying to ban high-capacity magazines. I'm talking about a world where manufacturers no longer manufacture ammunition. I'm talking about a world where the Industrial Revolution has been negated. Perhaps where the electric light bulb is something we tell our grandkids about in stories and point to it because it no longer works. If the future holds something like that, then maybe that blunderbuss or that brown Bess isn't looking so bad. Why is that? Well, there was a time, I remember in one of the Foxfire books, I can't remember which one, but they were talking about demonstrating making their own black powder guns, their own, whatever you want to call it, Pennsylvania, Kentucky rifles, making them by hand. And that's really the last and most sophisticated gun that humans made by hand. And I'm not talking prototypes like John Browning's first prototype 1911 or something. I'm talking about where a small community, a tribe, a village, there was a guy there or a couple of guys there that could team together and make a firearm. And the last time that was possible, and the last time that was done pre-industrial revolution where things were mass-produced, was black powder. And the steel could be handmade and handmade strong enough to withstand the pressures of black powder. And not only that, but you have to feed a gun. I don't remember the story if it was Daniel Boone or Davy Crockett, and obviously I wasn't there, but he would go on prolonged expeditions with his long rifle, and he would run out of powder and make his own. You can make your own black powder. I'm not going to get into that in this show. There's probably some ATF regulation against me telling you how to do it. But it's pretty common knowledge. It's not hard to find out how to make black powder. And if one man could do it on the frontier, if villages could do it, if some Chinese man hundreds and hundreds of years ago could figure out how to do it with common earth minerals, then you can figure out how to do it as well. In a world like that, a weapon like that has some real advantages. And don't think that they're not capable. Look at how many men died in the Civil War. Those were black powder guns. Let me tell you a story about my childhood. I remember there was a small hardware store that my father would often go to. We grew up very rural. Father's a commercial fisherman. A lot of that requires going to the store for this many copper nails or this many whatever nails or need this thing or that thing. One of my favorite times is sitting next to him, shotgun in the truck, and whatever he was talking about, and then going to the hardware store. I have fond memories of that. Well, hanging up in that hardware store was a black powder rifle. And this was before all the, well, maybe they existed, but before I'd ever seen or handled like the new modern inline muzzle-loading rifles that are basically modern guns that just theoretically load through the muzzle. This was like a percussion cap, something very akin to what you would see pioneers using, and it would hang up in there. And this wasn't an FFL. That was like the only guns they had were those old black powder muskets. And I saw this hanging up there in the Virginia hardware store in a small town, and I always thought it was cool. Well, as I understand, my uncle, who often went to that hardware store as well, because again, a very small community, he bought that. And my uncle, who often took me hunting, I believe probably more than my father, will. And I'm very grateful that God blessed me with an uncle like that. He could teach me how to hunt and fish and take me out, because I wasn't his son, but he treated me like one. And I'm honored for that. Anyway, he let me use that black powder rifle. And I went out into his back lot. I don't even know if we owned the land, but we sure acted like we did. And I went back there with that old muzzleloader, and I took a fine whitetail buck. It's one of the things I have memory burn on as a child. I remember that buck strutting through a clear-cut area, one that had been cut out for logging. I don't know how long ago, but you could tell that it had been. And it was quite a bit open compared to the woods around it. And I remember this buck it had to be a cold morning because of what I remember. This buck strutting through this back field. And I remember the breath coming out of him. And I remember him walking. And then I remember thinking I had the shot and bringing the gun up, and that deer at a trot or a run. I remember him quartering to me, and I remember taking the shot. And I remember him running hard after that and then crashing hard into a tree. And I remember how happy I was at a job well done. That would have been a hard shot with a modern rifle. It would have been a hard shot with a shotgun. But with a muzzle-loading rifle, I believe 50 caliber Hawkins-style rifle, it's a beautiful memory. And I tell you that to tell you this. They're deadly. Shot for shot, a 50 caliber muzzleloader is as deadly as most modern guns are. The only problem is you get one shot. But round for round, they are deadly. I don't even remember what it was loaded with, because I think my uncle loaded it and gave it to me. I don't even think I knew how to load the thing. I don't know if he was expecting me to shoot a deer that day. But whether it was loaded with a round ball or a Menet ball, however you pronounce that, it's a French guy. Whatever it was loaded with, it dropped that deer. It killed that deer with one shot. They are deadly. Again, look at how many men fell by the Civil War. And for a large swath of human warfare with guns, they were black powder guns. It's only very recently, very soon after the Civil War, we went to smokeless powder and even metallic cartridges with black powder for a time. So they are deadly and they are effective. And again, if you have to make your own ammo, that's kind of where it stops, unless you're like some super sophisticated chemist, which I am not, and most of us listening probably are not. Making smokeless powder is a dangerous, very precise undertaking that I don't know could be done if you rolled us back to before the Industrial Revolution. You certainly can make your own black powder, and there's ways to test it. And again, I don't want to run afoul of the ATF, but you can do it. You can make it by yourself. And you'll say, what about primers? Well, I've got two answers for that. One, I won't tell you how to do it, but you can reload a primer. Any reloader that's reloaded a metallic cartridge knows you punch the old primer out. Well, it has a dent in it. I don't think I'm breaking any ATF rules by telling you that you can simply take a small punch that fits inside that primer and flatten it back out, and it's ready to be reused. And you would pair that or match that with whatever compound you wanted to that would do the job of igniting that black powder. It can be done. Again, you can make that without having to go and find store-bought primers. That, again, probably won't be available post an event like this. The other solution I have is rolling back a bit farther to the flintlock. What they used, what the people that settled Appalachia likely had. And flint is a generic term. As I understand it, flint comes from Europe, but there's plenty of rocks that are hard enough to cause a spark when they strike the striker on a flintlock. If you don't know what I'm talking about, a flintlock is literally a locking mechanism that holds a piece of flint that throws it forward on a hammer, strikes a piece of metal, and creates a spark. It's about as primitive and still have a firearm as you can get without going crazy like a matchlock, which you don't really want. So those are your two solutions for making your own priming system, and I think of that, the flintlock would be a good choice. Maybe something worth having. You know, a flintlock blunderbuss, if you don't know a blunderbuss, it's kind of what you picture the Pilgrims having. It looks kind of goofy, but it's very utilitarian. If you're going to have one black powder gun, I don't even know if anybody still makes them, maybe reproduction, but they're basically not as dramatic, but they're basically a long gun that's shaped quasi like a trumpet horn where it goes and it gets bigger at the end. And you could stuff that thing with one big lead ball. You could stuff it with literally rocks, with pea gravel, with shot that you made, with nails. You could shove that thing with anything, basically. And because of that shape, it's very forgiving of what you load it with. That would be pretty cool. You could also just have a smooth bore, which is basically anything you want. A smooth bore musket is easily to turn into a shotgun. You know, that's kind of where we started bifurcating into specialty shotguns and specialty rifles. Before the advent of the rifle, you just had, you know, a 60 or 70 caliber smooth bore long arm, which today is basically a shotgun that they loaded with one big round ball. So that would be not a bad choice. You could do that and have it work just like it worked back then. Something that would be really cool, they also make double barrel muzzle loading shotguns. I don't know if anybody makes a double loading muzzleloader flintlock shotgun, but then you get two shots and a lot of firepower, and you could load one with buck and ball, or one with just a ball and one with just a buck, or one with buckshot and one with birdshot, and head out into the woods. And that'd be a good combo even today. If you told me I could hunt an area rich with game and that's what I had to take, I wouldn't be upset about it. Now let's talk about black powder in a different way. A lot of the early metallic cartridges that we think of today, and some that are still around, were originally loaded with black powder. Well, guess what that means? That means that you can once again load them with black powder. A real common example of that is the 4570. Now, most 4570s we think of are lever guns. I know they make other stuff, but the quintessential and by far most popular is a lever gun. And most of your black powder metallic cartridges are going to be manually operated in one way or another. And because of that, they're very forgiving. And since you might be making your own black powder, and it might vary from batch to batch, then you mechanically cycling that is an advantage. So that 4570 lever gun can still be loaded with black powder. It can still be reloaded with black powder, making your own primers, making your own black powder. You could still do that. It would still work. It worked when it was invented. The 4570 stands for 70 grains of black powder, as I understand it. Another real popular one, the 3030. I don't know if the 3030 was ever commercially available with black powder, but you certainly could load it with black powder and it would certainly still be deadly. The 32 Winchester Special, a little bit more specialized, a little bit more obscure, but as I understand it, it was designed so you could reload it with black powder. At least they had that in mind. And perhaps the most popular still today is the 38 Special. If you don't know, the 38 Special is designed, or was originally designed, for black powder. That's why it is so much bigger than a 9mm, even though it's less powerful, because you needed all that room in that big long case for the black powder. And the good news about black powder cartridges is they're generally designed to be filled. That's why the case had to be so big on, say, a 4570. If you load that with modern powders today, you don't use nearly all that case. But since it was designed to be fully loaded up with black powder, you can literally fill it up to where the bullet goes, put the bullet in, and there's your load. That's what it was designed for. If you had a 4570, your brass can be used I don't know how many times, especially with a low-pressure black powder load. You probably won't be making your own brass in this scenario, but you could reuse it a long, long time. And like for 38 specials and a good medium frame double action revolver, you could still load them with black powder, and they're still deadly. They were deadly when they came out in 38 special and black powder. And 158 grain, 148 grain lead semi-wad cutter loaded with black powder is still very deadly. And again, since the revolver is not dependent on the ammunition to cycle it, a lot more forgiving of how you load it, super hot or not as hot with the black powder, and it will still work. You'll have to clean it more often, but it'll still work. And now let's talk about a big one. The shotgun. The 12-gauge shotgun, the 20-gauge shotgun. If you'll notice, on the box of shots still today, it's kind of a holdover from days of yore. It'll say dram equivalent. Well, as I understand it, that dram equivalent stands for black powder amount. A dram is a measurement for black powder. It's very easy to reload shotgun shells even by hand once you fire them. And you can reload them with, guess what? Black powder that you made at home. You can reuse the primers, remake the primers. You can reload shotgun shells. If you can make the black powder, you can almost certainly make shot, or use gravel, or use old nails, or use ball bearings you pull out of a junkyard, or whatever you want to use. And this is part of the reason, not the whole reason, why I think that at one point I only had semi-auto shotguns. And I still think they're the best for kicking down doors and day-to-day operations. But if I have to load my own, or I have to scrounge even factory ammo, with the right ammo, semi-automatic shotguns can be, I think, the most reliable shotgun with a reasonable cadence of fire. But if you're talking about whatever ammo you can find, then your single shot and your pump shotgun, they start to take over. And the pump shotgun especially, because you still get that good rate of fire, but you manually operate it. It is, in my opinion, the fastest manually operated system. Even faster, I believe, than a lever gun. So you can manually operate that and load your own shells. And you could have a fairly modern firearm, let's say a Remington 870, a Mossberg 590, an old Winchester Model 12, and you could load black powder shells for it. Again, they were originally black powder anyway. You want to make sure you clean it, just like anything black powder. If you don't know, black powder is corrosive, and it does attract quite a bit of moisture. But you can still do it. I could still load up double-aught buck or something very equivalent, scrounging old wheel weights or old car batteries, and making my own black powder. A few chemicals you can usually find fairly commonly, which I won't get into for primers, again, because I don't want to run afoul of the ATF. But you could do that, and I could still run that Mossberg 590 in this scenario. Which brings me to some of you guys rolling your eyes like, oh, I've got enough ammo stored up for whatever. And I hope that you do, and I hope that you have enough ammo stored up that it'll last the rest of your lifetime in something like this. I hope you have enough stored up so that you can still practice and still have enough for the rest of your lifetime. But what about after you? What about your kids or your grandkids? And also, ammunition might be very, very valuable in a scenario like this. Perhaps, yes, you still want, in this kind of scenario, to have your AK or your AR loaded up with good factory ammo that you take very good care of. But perhaps you want a gun like this to go out and use day to day, to go hunting with, to go foraging with. Do you really want to use a premium hunting load to take out a grouse when you could do it with a black powder smoothbore muzzleloader and just load it again and walk around and shoot the next grouse and save that good ammo for maybe the middle of the winter when things got tough and you haven't eaten for 3 or 4 days, then you want to take out the 870 with the premium loads? Or let's say you're teaching somebody to shoot, having a gun that you can make the ammo for and have them understand the mechanics of stance, sight picture, sight alignment, trigger control, breath control, all those things, and teach them that with a gun that you can make the ammo for and not cry about it if you shoot it because it's never going to get replaced. An environment like this, every factory round that you fired would not be able to get replaced. But if you had a gun like this, I'm not saying you should get rid of all your other guns and just have black powder survival guns. I'm saying perhaps one in your arsenal is worth considering. A 45-70 lever gun, a muzzle-loading shotgun, an old 50 caliber Hawkins rifle like I took that deer with. Perhaps there's a place for that, even in a modern survivalist arsenal. I'd submit that to you today. And I want to say thanks for listening to this recording of Gunfighter Life. If you thought this was cool, if you thought this was useful, if you think this stuff is things that men should know, think this information is worth getting out there, if you're old enough like me, you remember the old PBS commercials supported by viewers like you. This is. If you listen to the older episodes, and even after I clean up the audio, you'll notice the improvement in the audio quality. If you'll notice that these episodes come out a couple of times a week instead of a couple of times a year, that's because men stepped up and helped. And if you're such a man, I pray that you would step up and help. GoodShepherdTraining.com. GoodShepherdTraining.com and become a patron. Or if you have another way, reach out to me on GoodShepherdTraining.com. But the primary way is to just help out on Patreon. With that, men, the tactical tip of the day. One of the things I carry in my baby bug out bag that a lot of people don't talk about or I don't think carry is a small file. A small file is good for a lot of things. It is good for sharpening a blade. Now you could do that with a small whetstone or something, but it's a lot easier to sharpen a blade quickly that's really dull, especially like an axe with a metal file. You can also use a metal file for starting fire like we talked about if you find a hard stone. You can also use a metal file in an urban environment. It's not great, but if that's all you have, you can cut through metal with it. And you can think of that in whatever application that you think is necessary at the time. Cutting through a padlock. If you're a fairly competent gunsmith, it comes in handy for a lot of little small gun projects. You could use it for something as simple as cleaning the terminal in your car battery if it's not working properly. You could use a small metal file for countless numbers of things. And they don't weigh very much. I'm talking about like the small jeweler's files or small machinist files. The one that I keep in my baby bug out bag is a triangle one because you can use it as a flat file. You can use it to cut things. But get whatever file works best for you. They don't weigh very much and they have a lot of utility. So that's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. We talked about maybe some bleak times in the future. But know that whatever comes, if God is with you, you'll prosper and be successful. Deuteronomy 28. Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God, that the Lord your God will set you high above all nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, because you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, the produce of your ground, the increase of your herds, and the offspring of your flocks. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. The Lord will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before your face. They shall come out against you one way, and flee before you 7 ways. The Lord will command his blessings on you in your storehouses and all to which you set your hands, and he will bless you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. The Lord will establish you as a holy people unto himself, just as he swore to you. If you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways, then all the people of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they shall be afraid of you. And the Lord will grant you plenty of goods in the fruit of your body, the increase of your livestock, and the produce of your ground, and the land which the Lord swore to your fathers to give you. The Lord will open to you his good treasure, the heavens, to give rain to his land in season, and bless all the work of your hand. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. And the Lord will make you the head, and not the tail. You shall be above only, and not be beneath, if you heed the commandments of the Lord your God, which Moses commanded you today, and are careful to observe them. So you shall not turn aside from any of the words which Moses commanded you this day, to the right or to the left, to go after other gods and serve them. Deuteronomy 28. Men, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.